Business, which is a statement by Alex Salmond on the Scottish Government's Programme for Government 2013-14. The Minister's statement will be followed by a debate. Therefore, there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Alex Salmond. First Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's better for all of us if decisions about Scotland's future are taken by those who care most about Scotland, and that's the people who choose to live and work in our country. Now, that's the simple, but I think compelling truth at the heart of the case for independence. And the best evidence of that lies, of course, in the record of this Parliament itself. It's now 16 years since the people of this country, in a referendum, had the confidence and belief to bring this Parliament into existence. And in doing so, we as a country, we as a people, made a choice between two futures. Between those who argued that Westminster should decide for Scotland how our schools, our universities, our hospitals should be run, and those who maintained that we'd all benefit if decisions about Scotland were taken here in Scotland. And we now know, beyond peradventure, that taking decisions in Scotland works for individuals, it works for families, and it works for communities. Now, the Parliament has demonstrated our concern for the most vulnerable in society. Free personal care for the elderly directly helps more than 77,000 people across Scotland. Our legislation on homelessness is seen as an example round the world. We have started to tackle Scotland's shameful health inequalities through the ban on smoking in public places and the legislation on minimum pricing of alcohol. We have helped hard-pressed families by freezing the council tax, by ending charges for prescriptions, for eye and dental checks and for bridge tolls. We have revived and protected the ancient and proud Scottish commitment to education by reintroducing free university and college tuition. And as confirmed this very day in today's first Police Scotland statistics, we have recognised communities' concerns about crime by adding more than 1,000 additional officers, and thus we have seen crime fall to its lowest level for 39 years. All of these measures, and many, many more, demonstrate that this Parliament is delivering for communities across the country. And conversely, we also know, and also beyond peradventure, that there's a heavy cost when we leave decisions in the hands of Westminster. We get governments we don't vote for. We get the bedroom tax. We get cuts to capital spending in the teeth of a recession. We get a tax on the poor and on people with disabilities. And we get weapons of mass destruction on the River Clyde. So a poll published yesterday and confirmed by the Social Attitude Survey, when they asked people whether they trust the Scottish Parliament or the UK Parliament to take decisions for Scotland, 60% of people in Scotland trust this Parliament compared to just 16% who trust Westminster. Now, the contrast and also the choice facing the people next year could not be clearer. This year's legislative programme, with 13 bills in total, will continue that strong track record, not just of this government, but of this Parliament. Of course, not everything that matters can be addressed through legislation, but legislation does matter. And all 13 bills in this year's programme will make a genuine difference to the people of Scotland. They demonstrate effective governance. Now, one of the opportunities provided by devolution is to reform Scotland's public bodies and public services, making them more efficient and better at their true role, which is serving the public. When we took office, there were 199 public bodies in Scotland. Now there are 113, a reduction of more than 40%. The public sector landscape is less cluttered, but more focused and therefore more effective. This year we'll introduce legislation to merge Historic Scotland and the Royal Commission for Ancient and Historic Monuments of Scotland, and that will enable them to work more efficiently and enhance our ability to preserve and protect our heritage. But the focus of public authorities can be really important, especially if a vacuum is developing at UK level. In 2010, the Food Standards Agency was controversially deprived of its responsibilities for nutrition and labelling by the UK Government. That move was subsequently seen by Westminster's Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee as contributing to the UK's poor handling of the horsemeat scandal. And therefore, the Food Standards Scotland Bill will establish a new body to take over all of the FSA's old functions. This new body will ensure that the industry and public in Scotland can have full confidence in the safety and provenance of our food. Now, there are several other bills this year which draw on expert reviews and will ensure that our laws are up to date and our public services are responsive and efficient. The Mental Health of Adults and Incapacity Bill will implement recommendations made by the McManus Review Group and others. It will improve the efficiency of mental health legislation and, importantly, for the first time, victims of mentally disordered offenders will be notified if the person who has committed a crime against them is being released from custody, and therefore be able to make representations to the Mental Health Tribunal. A damages bill will reform key aspects of the law relating to damage for personal injury, enacting the recommendations made by the Scottish Law Commission. The Conclusion of Contracts Bill will make it easier for contracts to be agreed electronically, helping to ensure that Scotland is an attractive place to do business. And the Bankruptcy Consolidation Bill will make bankruptcy law more accessible. And the Courts Reform Bill will enable civil cases to be resolved more quickly. It implements the proposals from Lord Gill's Scottish Civil Courts Review, including the establishment of a new Sheriff Appeal Court and a specialist personal injury court. It will ensure cases are dealt with at the right level, recognising the Court of Session's historic role as the apex of our civil courts and delivering faster, fairer justice right across the system. It represents the most radical set of changes to the civil courts for more than a century. There is one other change to the justice system that will be of interest to this Parliament. We all now accept the need to end the system of automatic early release, which was brought in by the Conservative government in 1993 and then left in place by the Labour and Liberal Democrat coalition here at Holyrood. It does not command public confidence. We are now in a position to end automatic early release for sexual offenders getting sentences of more than 4 years and for serious violent offenders. This follows the work to stabilise and then reduce over time the prison population by implementing other recommendations of the McLeish Commission, such as introducing strong community-based sentences for less serious offenders. Further steps will follow as we continue the successful implementation of the Justice Reform Programme. Now, these things I've mentioned, the action on food standards, the new rights for victims of mentally disordered offenders, the major improvements to the justice system, these are in themselves the fruits of having our own Parliament. I can tell you from 23 years' experience of Westminster that Parliament only rarely had the time or inclination to respond to specific Scottish challenges or priorities. However, these bills, that pattern of legislation, is also part of a larger story. This is a Parliament who listens to evidence, who seeks consensus where possible. It's a Parliament which has used its powers to create opportunities for people across the country. And through the programme for government that we are publishing today, it's a Parliament which, over the course of this year, will empower Scottish communities and create a fairer Scotland, accelerate economic recovery and mitigate the impact of Westminster austerity. One of the most important bills of the next Parliament is the Community Empowerment and Renewal Bill. This bill will strengthen community planning, it will simplify the operation of the community right to buy and make it easier for communities to buy public sector land and buildings. One of this Parliament's great early achievements was the Land Reform Scotland Act, introduced by a coalition government with support across this chamber. This government has given new momentum to the right to buy provisions of that legislation. We launched the Scottish Land Fund, established the Land Reform Review Group, and earlier in the summer announced a new ambition that by 2020 the amount of land owned by the communities of Scotland will double to an impressive total of 1 million acres. In June, we approved an application to register a community interest in land at Cape Wrath, next to the famous lighthouse. There are, in fact, two famous lighthouses in the north and south tips of the west coast of Scotland. The southern one at the Mull of Galloway came into community ownership this year. The land at Cape Wrath is now well on its way to community ownership. And with due respect to the Ministry of Defence, I suspect that most people in Scotland would rather have the stunning walkways of Cape Wrath, including the northern end of the new Scottish National Trail, in community ownership and freely accessible to the people, rather than being the extension to a bombing range. This year's summer cabinets so additional steps to empower communities. In July in Shetland, we established a working group to look at greater powers for island councils. 2 weeks ago in Hoyt, we facilitated the Borderlands Initiative, which sees the Scottish Borders Council, Dumfries and Galloway Council working with Northern English local authorities. Last week in Campbelltown, we announced the establishment of a rural parliament to give greater weight to the needs and priorities of remote and rural communities. This morning in Dundee, I saw the importance of community empowerment in urban areas. St Mary's Community Centre was created by the people in that local area. They created a board, raised the funding, drove the project through. I saw one of the art workshops that the centre provides, and everyone I met was passionate about the benefits of the centre and the importance of the work done by the community to help itself. When the Cabinet was in Campbelltown, I spoke about how independence offers an opportunity to renew democracy at all levels in Scotland. That's true at a national level. We can draft a written constitution affirming the most treasured values of a newly independent nation, but it also applies at local level. Independence isn't just about national institutions, it's about releasing the potential of our people and of our local communities. Our licensing bill is a further example of a commitment to strong local powers. It improves and extends powers for local authorities in areas such as the regulation of metal dealers, a move which will help to tackle metal theft, and the licensing of taxis, private hire cars. It will introduce a new offence for supplying alcohol to under 18-year-olds. But it will also introduce a new licence system for air weapons. Following the tragic death of Andrew Morton some years ago, there was wide support in this chamber for devolving the regulation of such weapons. Now this Parliament can finally meet public concern over the issue, finding a Scottish solution to that Scottish priority. Now, this Government also recognises that strong public services are a bedrock on which communities and individuals rely. They are an essential part of our vision for a fairer Scotland. Since the start of the Scottish Patient Safety Programme in 2008, standardised mortality in hospitals has fallen by almost 12%. Don Berwick, who was President Obama's advisor on healthcare and recently advised the UK Government about how to meet the problems in the health service south of the border, said that the Scottish programme is, quote, without doubt, one of the most ambitious safety initiatives in the world. National in scale, bold in aim, disciplined in science, aligned towards a common vision, making Scotland the safest nation on earth from the viewpoint of healthcare. The programme is an outstanding example of how devolution has enabled us to protect the National Health Service as a genuine public national health service. Housing is another example. In 2003, the Homelessness Act is one of the most significant commitments ever made by any parliament anywhere to assist homeless people. In 2002, 10,000 homeless households were classed as non-priority cases, with no right to settled accommodation. This year, the figure is 0. All people made unintentionally homeless now have a right to settled accommodation. And the housing bill we will introduce next year is a further step towards making decent housing available to everyone. By removing right to buy entitlements, the bill will protect social housing stock. It will also strengthen protection for tenants in the private rented sector by introducing new measures to deal with housing disputes and to regulate the letting industry. The legislation forms part of a broader commitment from this Government to make decent housing accessible and affordable. During the 5 years of this Parliament, we intend to build 30,000 affordable homes, at least 5,000 of which will be council houses. For those interested in statistics, and I suspect that commands the whole chamber, this represents a 66,500% increase on the rate of council house construction under the previous Government, when famously 6 council houses were built in 4 years, all of them in Shetland. These commitments, a truly national health service, decent affordable housing, they're part of a wider vision of society, one based on cohesion, not division, social inclusion, not stigma. And that belief and that philosophy explains why we have made certain services universally available. Pensioners benefit from free bus travel. That is, all pensioners. All of us have the reassurance of free personal care being available when we are older. We established in 2007 there were actually 600,000 people earning below $16,000 a year who were liable to pay prescription charges. Many people had to choose between prescribed medicine or which prescribed medicine they could take until this government restored the National Health Service free at the point of need. Students have the right to free education, enabling them to earn and then contribute to society through a fair taxation system. These advances are what we like to call the social wage. Services are available to everyone because everyone contributes to society. It's the same spirit which has influenced other government policies. No compulsory redundancies in the public sector, the introduction of a living wage, the council tax freeze to help hard-pressed families. Some people see the price of such policies, not their value. They say that these social gains are not sustainable. I say what makes them sustainable is that they are universal, part of a social wage. If they weren't universal, then those in receipt of social benefit would be separated and stigmatised, exactly as is happening with the UK government's welfare agenda. And far from being a something-for-nothing culture, the social wage is a contract we have with the people of Scotland. To suggest this is something for nothing is to mimic the bankrupt ideology prevailing in the Westminster Parliament. The social wage also has an economic benefit. By helping to provide a secure and stable and inclusive society, the public sector will nurture and encourage the talent and ambition of the people. Scotland will be a place where people want to invest, to work, to live. The social wage helps to show that prosperity and fairness gang together. There is no trade-off between living in a wealthy country and living in a good society. So the social wage is part of the distinctive approach that this government has to supporting recovery in recent years. The budget bill will maintain that approach while continuing to drive recovery and long-term economic growth. We will continue to protect our infrastructure investment programme in the face of the 26% real terms cut from the UK government has made to the capital budget. We are supporting more than £10 billion of investment from 2012 to 2015. We are continuing to support key sectors of the economy, such as renewable energy, food and drink, life sciences and tourism. And we are investing in skills. We delivered more than 25,000 modern apprenticeships last year. 92% of those who completed an apprenticeship are still in work 6 months later. Now, the success of modern apprenticeship is one reason, just one, why youth unemployment has fallen from 113,000 to 77,000 since Angela Constance was appointed as Europe's only youth employment minister. It's still far, far too high, but we now have one of the better rates in Europe. Across Scotland, central government, local government, the third sector and the private sector are making young people our business. And the approach we have taken so far is working. Ernst & Young reported last month that our exports are expected to grow at 6 times the rate of the rest of the UK over the next 4 years. Our recession was shallower than the UK's. Scotland is performing better than the rest of the UK on all of the major employment measures. The number of inward investment projects Scotland secured increased by 49% last year. And Ernst & Young, again this summer, commented on the ongoing rise in Scotland's relative attractiveness for foreign direct investment compared to most other areas of the UK. Now, the Chamber will remember this is exactly the opposite of George Osborne's infamous prediction in November 2011, who said that the prospect of independence would deter inward investors. And he's maintaining his disastrous record of economic forecasting earlier this week by suggesting that Canada, the best-performing economy in the developed world, was somehow disadvantaged by its independence in comparison with the UK, the second worst-performing economy in the G7. The Chancellor of the Exchequer is in Aberdeen today, continuing this dismal record of forecasting. I heard him on the radio this morning claiming that Scotland's GDP would be 4% higher in 30 years' time if we stayed under Westminster control. In fact, as an independent country, Scotland's GDP will be 17% higher in 3 years' time, as our oil and gas reserves are counted for the first time in our GDP statistics. This will place us in the top 10 countries in the OECD in terms of wealth per head. But within the UK, we are severely limited in the measures we can take to assist recovery and boost gross domestic product. Key fiscal levers such as public capital investment, corporation tax, air passenger duty remain outside our control. Now, we've already shown the potential for a different approach to taxation. One of this government's first steps was to establish the most competitive business rates regime anywhere in the UK. We have legislated to replace stamp duty with the more progressive land and buildings transaction tax. We have also introduced a bill for the new Scottish landfill tax. The Revenue Scotland and Tax Powers Bill will establish Revenue Scotland to collect these taxes from 2015. The bill will also put in place a framework which will apply to all devolved taxes. Over the period to 2020, we estimate that the start-up and operational costs in setting up Revenue Scotland will be significantly lower than if we'd asked Her Majesty's Revenues and Customs to perform the same duty. That could be a sign of the UK's diseconomies of scale. However, it further makes the case for tax powers being controlled and administered from this Parliament. The establishment of Revenue Scotland is an historic step, but it's only a first step. After all, these devolved taxes, which are an offer from Westminster if we stay in the UK, mean that from 2015 Scotland would collect 15% of all taxation revenue rather than 7% at the present moment. This Parliament will still be a spending chamber rather than a revenue-raising chamber. That's deeply harmful to Scotland. It means we can't use our fiscal powers to grow the economy. Now, the Scottish economy, as I've said, has performed better than the rest of the UK in recent years. But what that means at present is in our first quarter of this year, our economy was 2% below its peak output level of 2008, while the United Kingdom was 3.9% below. It's worth noting that Canada, which by implication George Osborne thinks should merge with the United States of America, was 6.4% above its pre-recession peak. The contrast between Scotland and the UK and these international ratings demonstrate a truth. This Parliament can mitigate the impact of UK government policies. Our growth levels can be slightly higher, our employment figures a bit better, but mitigation is what it is. We can't stop capital spending being slashed, we can't use taxation policies to encourage business, we can't harness all of the natural and human resources to build a richer and fairer society. And there's a further reason why we need independence. By next year, the UK government's welfare reforms will reduce household incomes in Scotland by almost £2 billion a year. Much of that money is taken out of the pockets of those in work and earning low wages. Yet last year, the UK government announced £350 million more of spending on the next stage of Trident renewal. That money, of course, is barely 1/3 of 1% of the estimated £100,000 million lifetime total costs of a decision to replace the current Trident system. And the question is, how can any government choose to embark on expenditure of £100,000 million to renew Europe's largest concentration of weapons of mass destruction while reducing benefits for the poorest households across the country? Or as Margaret Lynch, the Chief Executive of Citizens Advice Scotland, asked this Parliament's Welfare Reform Committee this year, when she spoke of the impact of the cuts on her organisation. She asked, how is it possible in the 21st century, in an advanced capitalist society, that we are having to give our volunteers suicide awareness training because the welfare state is being ripped asunder? This government is providing almost £8 million of support to advice centres across Scotland so that they can cope as people in extremity come to them for help. It's one of a number of steps that we have taken to mitigate Westminster's welfare cuts. We have already, jointly with COSLA, agreed this year to meet the cost of the UK Government's cut in funding for council tax benefit and the successor arrangements, and that protects more than 500,000 people on low incomes across Scotland. This year, we're providing an additional £9 million towards the new Scottish Welfare Fund, bringing a total of £33 million. Now, the fund helps vulnerable people in a financial emergency or enables them to get household goods to set up home or remain in the community rather than going into care. In this session, the Scottish Welfare Fund Bill will put the basis of this new fund onto a secure and statutory footing, establishing a safety net for vulnerable people across the entire country. There's a hugely important point here. I talked earlier about how devolution has protected the National Health Service in Scotland. Looking at the chaos, the fragmentation brought about by health reforms south of the border, is there anyone who seriously wishes that Westminster should run our health service? And seeing the misery and suffering being brought about by welfare changes, is there anyone who wants Westminster to retain control of welfare?
Sadly, yeah.
An independent Scotland will have the wit to develop a welfare system that lets work pay without reducing people to penury or despair. Presiding Officer, in addition to the 13 bills we are introducing this year, the Parliament will consider the Referendum Scotland Bill. It provides the legal underpinning for a vote on the 18th September next year, when the people of Scotland will decide this country's future. Either a yes or a no vote has consequences for the future. The real debate is how to create a prosperous country and a just society. Our attitude towards the disadvantaged and vulnerable, our welcome for people who want to settle here, our relationship with Europe and the rest of the world, our strength as a society to which we all contribute and from which we all benefit. Even more fundamentally, independence about who decides on these questions. The problem for the No campaign will have is they try to explain why an independent Scotland would be uniquely incapable of taking these decisions for ourselves. Why should we rely on a Westminster system to take decisions, many of which, like the bedroom tax, have been utterly misguided, when we have proved for the last 14 years that we as a Parliament are more than capable of delivering real progress for the people of Scotland? In the months ahead, we may well debate our particular views about education, about health, about employment, about welfare reform. But one thing which the record of this Parliament shows and demonstrates, and upon which we should all agree, is that it's better to decide things for ourselves than to have others decide for us. In my view, the logic of that, completing the powers of this Parliament, that's independence, is what the people will vote for in 380 days' time. Now, the value of Scotland's Parliament is demonstrated by this programme for government, and that's why I commend it to this chamber.
That ends the statement from the First Minister. We now move on to the next item, which is a debate on the Scottish Government's programme for government. Members who wish to take part in that debate should press the Request to Speak button now. And I call on Joanne Lamont. Ms Lamont, you have 18 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and that was so uplifting. I almost felt like reaching into Jackie's handbag for a salt tire. You know, I did imagine that possibly during the recess, the First Minister might like to re-engage with the real world. On the evidence of that today, he is as distant and delusional about what Scotland is like as he was the day he left for the Rees-side. Because despite Andy Murray's best efforts, the summer didn't get off to the best of starts for the First Minister. He has kept himself busy. By making a series of speeches, each one more ludicrous than the last. We too could be like the Isle of Man, independent but still part of 5 unions, everything changing but nothing changing. And in his statement, he says it's better for us to make decisions ourselves rather than let other people do so, and yet he's happy to cede economic policy, fiscal policy, monetary policy to Westminster Treasury team. He knows that doesn't make sense, and the people behind him know it even more so. However, over the recess, Alex Salmond made clear what his one priority was. Not health, not education, not economic growth, just a referendum on independence. And I'll tell you where I was. I was listening. See, the difference is when you listen and understand what's happening to people in their lives, that informs your politics, not a project you've been interested in for the last 40 years. It's not about talking to people, but listening to their lived experience. But just a referendum on independence.
A little bit of calm, please.
I know that was the line you've been given, and you've done very well at shouting it. Let's go on. Today was an opportunity for the First Minister to draw a line under that summer of woe. It was an opportunity to show us that we could take him seriously as Scotland's First Minister. He could do that by bringing forward a legislative programme that met this one crucial test, that it would put the interests of the people of Scotland before the interests of the SNP. With this unambitious, lacklustre and moribund programme, he has completely failed. Nicola Sturgeon described it this morning as radical. I can only think she has a very sheltered life. I bow to no one in my interest in a bill for electronic signatures, and I am as interested in merging historic Scotland as much as the next person. But nobody could pretend that that is radical. In May 2011, as the First Minister often reminds us, he won an unprecedented majority. Yet he uses that power to put Scotland on pause. We no longer have a government, we have a campaign which will do anything not to rock the boat ahead of next year's vote, despite the challenges we face as a country. As I said earlier, the First Minister made a series of speeches this summer. None of those speeches spoke about the pressures on our health service and his plan to ensure our care is not affected as a result. And indeed, reflecting on what the First Minister said in his passage on the part of the statement on promoting fairness in the NHS and its safety programme, listening to that passage, I was trying to work out whether he's totally insensitive, complacent, or whether he actually lives in the real world at all. No mention of the concerns of staff and patients about hospital mortality rates, especially staff and patients in the constituency of his own health secretary. He waxes lyrical about his vision for Scotland, but does not do the basic job of government in addressing these problems. This week, teachers have warned us that pressure on school resources are going to impact on educational standards, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. Yet we know the Scottish Government's solution. Mike Russell has told us he can't do a thing to improve our schools until after independence. We want the government to address the concerns of people in the real world. Mike Russell went to Glasgow University and press released that he couldn't do anything about schools until after independence. He ought not to deny it now. And on care, when I exposed the scandal of 15-minute care visits, the Minister responsible, Michael Matheson, told me, 15-minute care visits, that old chestnut, he said. Since then, care workers have spoken out about the pressures they face, told to task and go, and not speak to elderly people isolated in their homes. It turns out Michael Matheson is in part right about 15-minute visits. In some areas, it is down to 7. That is a scandal and affront to us all, and it should be the business of government to address it. Not tell us that everything is fantastic, but use the powers you've got to make a difference. When are we going to face up to this challenge? Not any time soon, by the sounds of it. I'll take you in a moment. Childcare. We welcome the move to 600 hours. We would also, however, welcome the money to local authorities to deliver them, or at least for John Swinney to outline for us what our councils have to cut from their budgets to pay for that promise. But we know it won't be enough to make a difference to families' lives. How do we know? The First Minister has told us we will get a childcare revolution, but only after, you guessed it, independence. It is about addressing concerns right now. And on the bedroom tax, dreamt up by the Tories, but the depressing thing is that the SNP...
Order! Order!
Cue noises off. But the depressing thing is that the SNP hasn't lifted a finger to help them. It would take only £50 million to protect the most vulnerable tenants in Scotland from this unfair and unjust tax. But again, we have to wait until after independence. We have offered to work with the Scottish Government in this matter, and they have rejected us. Today, Wonga has announced profits of £62.5 million. Where is the funds for a loan guarantee fund to stop people falling into the hands of the extortionate legal money lenders? Young people looking for the skills and qualifications needed for a tough job market. Where is the plan for our colleges that have been decimated by this government over the last few years, and for the young people depending on it? It will ring very hollow. It will ring very hollow that the First Minister believes we have free education in Scotland. If you have not got an access to a place, then there's not much free about the education at all. Nicola Sturgeon said this morning that there's a programme for economic growth. But sorry, this government is going to need to do more than just say it for it to happen. A feature of this government is they tell us they're doing things and live with a different world out there. Unacceptable levels of unemployment, of underemployment, of people stuck on low wages with 0 hours contracts. Where is the action in this programme to help people? What could the government be doing now to make a difference to people's lives, rather than spending all of their energy and enthusiasm and commitment in persuading people to vote for independence? Well, if people remembered they were parliamentarians rather than nationalists, they might know where to start. Like Jenny Mara, who wants to bring forward measures to tackle the shame of human trafficking. Like Drew Smith, who is proposing an opt-out system of organ donation that could save many Scottish lives. Like Patricia Ferguson, who is proposing to reform our fatal accident inquiry system to ensure families are looked after when they lose a loved one. Like Ian Gray, who is proposing to regulate our buses so that those who rely on public transport can get a bus when they need it. Like Richard Simpson, who is proposing a raft of measures to save lives by tackling Scotland's unhealthy relationship with alcohol. Like Neil Findlay, who is taking steps to give people confidence in our politics again by reforming lobbying rules. Like Mark Griffin, who is proposing changes to help sign language users. The First Minister, with Scotland's devolved powers, has the ability to do so much more, but his government turns the other way, always telling us what he cannot do rather than what he can do. He talks positively about devolution, but either doesn't understand it or doesn't want it. He wants to frame this debate as if it was between Scotland and the Tories. And he denies that one of the great successes of devolution was when a Labour government funded record levels of public services, which we were then allowed to deliver within our communities. This is a man who lacks even the self-awareness to say. He tells us, this is a parliament which listens to evidence and seeks consensus where possible. If only that were true. For if it were true, his ludicrous, ill-thought, dangerous proposals for independence would have been flung out long ago. The First Minister says his referendum will give the people of Scotland a chance to finish our Home Rule journey. He takes to himself, ironically, the successes of devolution, which were delivered by those committed to staying in the United Kingdom, not those leaving it. But here's a strange thing. Neither the First Minister nor the SNP were ever on that Home Rule journey. They wouldn't sign the claim of right. I know, I was there. Alex Salmond stood outside the Constitutional Convention and he had nothing to do with the Calman Commission. I signed the claim of right. You absented yourself from it. The truth is, Alex Salmond and the SNP refused to be part of the journey which set up this Parliament. They stood apart from the will of the Scottish people and those of us who fought for devolution. And the irony that those driven by a desire to take power closer to people through devolution are now witnessing a Scottish Government that pulls power to itself rather than empowering people. Why so timid? Why so timid on community empowerment? And so they stand again, apart from the will and ambitions of the Scottish people. If there was any doubt that the SNP don't believe in devolution and this Parliament, it is this legislative programme. Nothing in it to address the real needs of the Scottish people. Nothing progressive, nothing radical, no attempt to exploit the full powers of this Parliament. And the reason for that? It is not in Alex Salmond's interest to prove what this Parliament can currently do. Not in his interest to show our lives can be improved by devolution. All of us in here know, week in, week out, minister after minister saying, well, that's a very interesting problem, and after independence we will solve it. They damn themselves with their own words. And, presiding officer, all of Scotland knows that Alex Salmond will always put his own interests ahead of the people of Scotland. The First Minister put his referendum ahead of Scotland's needs. That is why this legislative programme is as thin as his case for separation. So the First Minister has decided that Scotland must wait for any of our needs to be addressed until after the referendum. His backbenchers must ask themselves, are they parliamentarians or placemen and placewomen? Because surely they can see they are standing up for Salmond, not standing up for Scotland. And in conclusion, the depressing fact that Scotland is on pause while we wait for Alex Salmond's referendum, and families across my constituency and across this country are waiting for action until that referendum comes. It's a denial of your responsibilities. Well, let me remind the First Minister, this battle is Scotland versus Salmond, and Scotland is going to win.
Many thanks. I now call on Ruth Davidson. 8 minutes or thereby, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that in the same breath that the First Minister can celebrate the success in tackling unemployment in Scotland, he can then claim the UK Government's approach, which is fundamental to delivering economic growth, is all wrong for Scotland. The UK delivers for Scotland, yet it chokes the First Minister to admit that we're moving in the right direction, thanks to the action of the coalition in Whitehall. And yet, in the same breath, he said he would keep the economic underpinnings, the pound sterling, the Bank of England. So it is with deep irony, Presiding Officer, that in presenting this legislative programme, the parliamentary year will be marked not by the introduction of new laws to materially improve the lives of Scots, but by the Scottish Government's obsession with the break-up of the United Kingdom and its white paper on independence. So this parliamentary session will be dominated by something which could not possibly be considered until more than a year from now. And clearly, I hope it never will. And while, of course, we do await the white paper and its appearance with interest, and of course planning for the break-up of the most successful political, economic and social union the world has ever seen, will take some time. But from the evidence of this programme, there has been time for little else, and the governance of Scotland is all but on hold. Now, for unionists like myself, that is a great tragedy. The tragedy of the referendum campaign, because at a time when we should be getting on with the job the vast majority of the people of Scotland want us to do, that's working together to make Scotland a better place, valuable government time is being spent on planning for something that even large numbers of SNP voters reject. So if we glance back at the SNP's manifesto for 2011, it shows us how many promises they still have to honour. And this, remember, is an administration with an overall majority which allows it to do anything it wants with the powers at its disposal. So what happened? What happened to the grandiose promises to help create new retail banks and support social banking? Nothing. What about the promise to create the UK's most competitive business taxation system? Instead, we've got the result of a new retail tax to burden Scottish businesses with a £95 million disadvantage. Then there was a pledge to create a simple town centre regeneration fund. I'm sorry, but it's still under generation. And what about increasing Scottish exports by 50% in 6 years? And the daddy of them all, the non-profit distribution scheme, which promised to deliver up to £500 million of investment in building projects like schools and hospitals in its first 2 years, but so far has produced but 20 million. From what I can see from the programme presented today, there is no intention to make good on those pledges anytime soon. Instead, we have 2 new bills about the governance of public bodies and 4 bills on technical changes to the administration of law. The Community Empowerment and Renewal Bill makes a great play of strengthening community voices. But will this mean that the Scottish Government will stop riding roughshod over communities when it comes to wind farm applications? And while this bill talks about streamlining community right to buy in the accompanying housing bill, that right is being taken away from individuals. In fact, in that housing bill, we see the abolition of right to buy, the most empowering legislation passed in this country for a generation, which created a property-owning democracy. The First Minister talks about what is democratically right for this country, yet he seeks to deny its people the one thing which gave them real economic and social freedom. Thanks to the Conservative Party, thousands of people took control of their own lives, unshackled as they were from the whims of local authorities' determination to control every aspect of those lives. Indeed, it is also thanks in large part to the Conservative Party that the Revenue Scotland and Tax Powers Bill is necessary at all to establish a system for dealing with those new tax raising powers coming to the Scottish Parliament in 2015. This is in response to the Scotland Act, the biggest transfer of fiscal powers for 300 years, enacted by a Conservative-led UK government. It is thanks too to the Scottish Conservatives that we have those 1,000 extra police officers of which the First Minister spoke. It is also thanks to the Scottish Conservatives that the council tax freeze happened at all. We also called for action to improve the care for preschool children, and we're glad to see some recognition of the problems in this crucial phase of life in the continued passage of the Children and Young People Bill. It is therefore to be regretted that amidst the rhetoric about a commitment to education, there is nothing in this programme which directly addresses the continuing underachievement of thousands of young people leaving the education system, unable to read, write or count properly. It is a stain on this country, with its once proud reputation for educational excellence, that approximately a fifth of our young people leave school functionally illiterate. Apart from improving life chances and employability, with more effort put into tackling illiteracy, would be better able to tackle the challenges faced by the police and justice system in dealing with offenders. And today, we have learned from the First Minister that the Criminal Justice Bill will now include the abolition of automatic early release for serious offenders. He rightly says that that no longer commands public respect. And it's something the Scottish Conservatives have been ceaseless of in our criticism. Unfortunately, despite promises not just in his 2011 manifesto, but in his 2007 manifesto too, this does not extend to all offenders. Indeed, long-term sentences, the ones he talks about, the 4 years, accounted for just 3% of sentences handed down last year. So when 97% of custodial sentences will be untouched by the change, it should be no surprise to the First Minister that we will continue to argue that the reduction of prison terms passed by our courts should be in principle a reward and not a right. But as one welcome measure is introduced, albeit in baby steps, a fundamental liberty could be at risk from another bill. That is the plan under this bill to abolish the safeguard of corroboration in criminal trials without a full review of the law of evidence, something we believe is essential if this is not to lead to future miscarriage of justice. The precious principle of innocence until proven guilty must be protected, and there is a real risk that it will be sacrificed to secure more convictions, particularly for sex crimes. Now, of course, we all want all offenders to be caught and punished, but the price must not be the removal of liberty from the blameless. I urge the First Minister, if he will not listen to members of this chamber, will he listen to the Scottish legal profession? The Law Society of Scotland, the Faculty of Advocates have both argued that this change will lead to miscarriages of justice without significant change in criminal procedure. Removing corroboration from Scots law potentially leaves Scotland with one of the lowest levels of protection against wrongful conviction in the Western world. So we urge the Scottish Government not to introduce this change without a wider review of the law of evidence. Now, the First Minister says in his foreword that now is the time to extend the advantages of self-government. Well, I agree with that. But sadly, this programme is notable not for what it achieves, but for what it does not. It does little to extend the advantages he has, because it's not in his interest to make devolution work as we believe it can. It is in his narrow self-interest to hold back this country, to limit its ambitions within the framework of the United Kingdom and to present a deliberately negative and uninspiring picture of Scotland. We do not recognise his view of a nation trodden on by its bigger neighbour, but we do see a thriving nation that is playing a crucial and enthusiastic role in the continued development of the fully integrated family of nations on these islands. The First Minister says he's ambitious for Scotland, but sadly, this programme shows that ambition is more for him than for his country. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on Willie Rennie. 6 minutes or thereby, please.
With over 50,000 incidents a year, the prevalence of domestic violence in Scotland is far too high. Too many women and men suffer behind closed doors and often in silence. We should signal on the first day of this new session our renewed determination to root out the problem. I would welcome new proposals from the Government on how we can do more to tackle domestic violence in our country, on education to help identify abusive relationships, on reviewing guidelines on the prosecution of domestic violence, and on funding for support for the range of organisations and facilities to support people who find themselves in abusive relationships. I'm pleased to see that the Scottish Parliament will be giving an early opportunity to vote on equal marriage. It's a mark of a modern, open, tolerant and liberal society for those who wish to get married to have the ability to do so. Churches have the power and the right not to participate in such ceremonies. Individuals will also be protected if they don't wish to conduct such ceremonies, even if their church wants to.
Yes.
John Mason.
I wonder if the member could tell us if he is assured by the reassurances that have been given that actually people, ministers or clerics or even denominations will not be dragged through the courts because the European Court of Human Rights has the ultimate decision.
Will there any?
Yes, I am, because I think the appropriate measures will be taken at Westminster to ensure the changes to the Equality Act are introduced to protect those very individuals that John Mason talks about. So yes, I am reassured, and we need to make sure that Scotland joins the nations of the world that have equal marriage on the statute book, because it's a mark of a modern society that I want to see Scotland become. On childcare, I'd like the Scottish Parliament to match what's happening in England. That's because this week thousands of two-year-olds will be getting the chance, the right to 15 hours of nursery education each week. That's something the First Minister has denied to Scottish children. But he could change all that. He could concede that Professor James Heckman is right when he says that the best educational investment is before the age of 3. It's an opportunity to improve the life chances of young people through education. If the First Minister wanted, he could include this in his legislative programme. He spent much time during his contribution outlining new and sometimes old initiatives on community empowerment, something close to my heart. I am sure that we will look carefully at the proposals that he brings forward and support measures to give more powers to local communities. But the reality and the record is something different. After the centralisation of our police and fire service, which was one of the biggest transfers of power from local government to central government since devolution. So much for community empowerment. Recent news has shown that the economy is on the mend and that we are moving towards recovery. The OECD gave a positive assessment this morning on growth. Substantial progress has been made in the UK Government's plan to cut the deficit, reducing it by a third as a percentage of GDP since 2010. And we have seen significant progress over the past year in job creation and reducing unemployment. Although the Scottish figures wobble from month to month, it's clear we are benefiting from the 1 million new private sector jobs created across the UK. The challenges faced by hundreds of thousands of people still out of work in Scotland needs to be met by our two governments working together. I support much of what the Scottish Government does on growth and employment, but it's important that the Scottish Government and its agencies promote the UK schemes that are available in Scotland too. For example, the UK Commission for Employment and Skills survey shows that fewer Scottish companies have apprentices than companies in the rest of the UK. Scottish businesses get £2,000 off their national insurance from next April because of the changes being made by the UK Government. I want ministers in both governments to promote this so that small businesses think about using the savings to take on an apprentice or another employee. I want to hear Scottish ministers telling Scottish companies about that. And the £1 billion youth contract, which provides businesses with up to £2,275 per person for a job, training or work experience. The funding for lending scheme and the business bank, which will provide billions of low-cost capital. There's also the UK Enterprise Capital Funds worth £200 million, the annual investment allowance for investment in plant and machinery, which has increased from £25,000 to £250,000 for 2 years. The UK Green Investment Bank, based in Edinburgh, with £3.8 billion worth of UK government money to help unblock the financing of renewable projects. It's my hope that the Scottish Government will closely work with the UK Government to maximise these opportunities for Scotland. In conclusion, the next 12 months will set the course of this country for the next 300 years and more. The power vested in the hands of people who live in our great nation is immense. Everyone here, everyone in this chamber wants the best for Scotland. I'm in no doubt about that. We just disagree on how we want to achieve it. My support for a strong Scottish Parliament with Home Rule in a strong partnership with the United Kingdom is on the record. The stakes are high, the risks are great, but the opportunity of a renewed constitutional settlement within the UK is within our grasp. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on Alison Johnson. 6 minutes, please, or thereby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Government for advance sight of the First Minister's statement. Much of the First Minister's statement, of course, concentrated on the referendum next year. It's quite right that both sides continue to make arguments to further their case. Greens will continue to argue for the principle of decentralisation, that decisions should be made as close to those whom they affect as possible. And I hope we can all do this with the mutual respect that best facilitates the debate amongst us and all people in Scotland outside the Parliament who will really decide. It's also important, however, that we spend time making best use of the powers we already have. How we develop the economy is extremely important. I'm pleased to hear the First Minister make the argument that looking after the health and well-being of Scotland's people and creating an inclusive society where the maximum number of people can participate is key to making Scotland flourish. When Professor Stiglitz spoke to the EET Committee in February, he emphasised the importance of using a dashboard of indicators to measure a society's success. We must aim not to create growth in the economy purely for growth's sake. It's high-quality, meaningful, secure and well-paid jobs with full employment rights, warm, secure homes with secure tenancies, first-class education and health services, and a clean environment in which to live that people want, not an extra percentage point on GDP that benefits a few. Scotland's National Performance Framework provides the hope that we can lose the tunnel vision imposed by GDP and emphasise the things that make people's lives better and more fulfilling. Measuring median household income is one practical change we could easily make to help make our economic policy benefit more people. And government is expected to deliver across a wide spectrum of social, environmental and economic outcomes. Public procurement accounts for £9 billion of spending a year and should be expected to do the same. We're constrained by EU rules on procurement, but we mustn't use this as an excuse for not making progress with the forthcoming procurement bill. It's our responsibility to make Scottish procurement work hard for Scottish society, our environment and economy. It's really important that our small and micro businesses are better able to access public procurement contracts and compete for work. Small, locally owned businesses create a resilient economy. They're more likely to hold on to and value staff. They're less likely to disappear off seeking the next big tax break or subsidy. And while ministers might not get to stand in front of the latest new thing, cutting a ribbon, there is substantial evidence supporting the wisdom of investing in smaller, local-level infrastructure projects as the best way to help people create jobs and the economy. And I'll be interested to look in more detail at today's statement and the planned bill's impact on women and children. We need to understand how a legislative programme or policy changes benefit different sections of society. We already know that the coalition government is imposing a gendered austerity on Britain. The cuts affect men and women, but it is women who are being chiefly hit through the loss of benefits, hit through the loss of public sector jobs, and hit as they're expected to fill the gap left by underfunded care and community services. The Scottish Government published its own gender analysis of UK cuts last week, and I hope this will be replicated for other areas of policy. A gender analysis of this year's budget would be a welcome addition. Gender comes into play across almost all areas of society, starkly in health and sport. Last month's BMJ reported that only 38% of 7-year-old girls in Scotland engaged in an hour's worth of physical activity each day, compared with 63% of boys. Significantly more men than women cycle, and only proper investment in safe junctions and segregated cycle lanes will convince more people that cycling will improve, not endanger their health. The government must increase spend on cycling and walking infrastructure, or the target of 10% of all journeys by bike by 2020 will remain a vague and unsupported vision. Many people in Scotland can't afford or don't want to have to rely on a private car. They want transport justice, and to see the level of investment in public transport increased to ensure that the government doesn't continue to miss climate targets. The First Minister has talked too of decentralisation and building strong local democracy. So far, this government has failed to convince me and many others that they are really committed here. I find it deeply ironic that a government campaigning for full independence has effectively removed the ability of local authorities to raise the revenue they need to properly fund local services. We don't want a mini Westminster here. Devolution must not stop here in Holyrood. The Community Empowerment and Renewal Bill should help clubs like Musselburgh Windsor take over the changing facilities they need. It should allow input and engagement with those who want to contribute to improving and running local activities, to working with the NHS in hospital community gardens, to using vacant land for allotments, working alongside local authorities and others. But we need to make sure that communities have sufficient capacity and support to make this a reality. Scottish Greens look forward to progress on equal marriage. We look forward to progress in childcare. It is much needed. Proposed bills on welfare additions, food standards and housing are welcome too. I don't have time to cover everything that I would like to, but I look forward to listening to the rest of the debate. Thank you.
Many thanks. We now move to open debate, and I call on Mark MacDonald to be followed by James Kelly. 6 minutes or thereby, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This is my first contribution in the Parliament since the Donside by-election, and I think it would be important. I think it's important at the beginning that I pay tribute to my predecessor, Brian Adam, who, as we all know, had tributes paid to him in Parliament at the time of his passing. Brian was a great source of encouragement and inspiration for me during my time as an activist and then as a city councillor working closely with Brian. And I know that Brian was a man who always put the communities of his constituency at the forefront, and that is something that I aim to do in following in his footsteps. Indeed, the constituency of Aberdeen-Donside is something of a microcosm for many of the issues that affect wider Scotland. Its social dynamics, which members will have seen as they came to campaign, range from the affluent to the areas of poverty that still exist within what is regarded outside of Aberdeen as a rich city. We still have what my colleague Kevin Stewart has often described as poverty amidst plenty within the city of Aberdeen. And I've spent the summer going around my constituency and talking to various groups within the community around issues that affect them. And turning to the legislative programme that lies before us, there is much in here which I think will be of benefit and of interest to the communities that I represent. It was interesting to note Joanne Lamont claiming that Scotland was now on pause. I think it's worth noting that Ms Lamont seemed to spend the entire summer on mute. But in terms of the legislative programme that sits before us, Presiding Officer, the Community Empowerment and Renewal Bill, I think, offers significant opportunities for community groups and organisations across Scotland. And I would echo some of what Alison Johnson was saying around the hopes that I have that it will allow, for example, whether it is for the development of a community garden and play facility, or whether it is for sports clubs to come together to develop a facility on land which is currently being unused. I think those are the kind of opportunities that we want to see being unlocked, because there seems to be far too much bureaucratic process that often lies in the way of that happening. And I hope that the Minister will be able to bring forward legislation that will allow for those groups to take control of resources within their community and operate them for the benefit of people in their community. I think one of the other interesting and very welcome elements of the legislative programme is the airgun licensing. I know that it is an issue which I arrived to during my time in Aberdeen as a parliamentary researcher and then latterly as a councillor. It was being pushed very hard by a Labour councillor at that time, Norman Colley, in relation to a potential bylaw in the city of Aberdeen itself to deal with the issue. I was delighted to receive Norman Colley's backing and endorsement during the course of the Donside by-election campaign, and I'm sure he would be equally delighted to learn of the progress that is being made on airgun licensing here in this Parliament, a demonstration of this Parliament taking action in Scotland to deal with priorities that have been identified within Scotland. I also noticed the visit of George Osborne to my constituency today, trotting out the claim that we don't need to look at taking control of oil in Scotland because it's already benefiting Scotland, apparently. Well, if he took the time while visiting my constituency to go and knock the doors in areas like Middlefield and Cummings Park, he would see there and encounter there many individuals who are feeling the sharp end of his welfare reform and austerity agenda. What we need to do is less of the taking away of benefits from people and more of ensuring that those who are in work, who rely, those who are in work, who rely on in-work benefits because of poor pay are lifted out of that depressing cycle. That's a way to reduce the benefit bill and improve the lot of people. It would be far better if we saw action from him on that rather than coming here to preach to Scotland. And that's why the legislative underpinning of the Welfare Fund is welcome, albeit depressing, because it highlights the idea that pervades the unionist parties, that the function of this chamber should be to mitigate bad decisions taken at Westminster using only a small array of tools at our disposal. If that lack of self-belief and vision is so inherent in the No campaign, it's little wonder that they cannot lift their eyes to the horizon and look at the future that Scotland could see and could realise were we possessing of the full powers of independence here in this chamber to take decisions on behalf of the people who elect us. Very briefly.
Jackie Bailey.
Can I thank the member for taking an intervention? The Scottish Welfare Fund has, of course, been devolved to Scotland by the UK Government. How can he explain the fact that the Scottish Government can't seem to spend it?
Well, in an interesting twist of fate, the Scottish Welfare Fund is also being administered via Scotland's local authorities, something which I'm sure the member would welcome, given she is so concerned about giving powers to local authorities. Perhaps if she gets on the blower to her local Labour council and gets them to do more to promote the Welfare Fund, she might find that they would start to spend some of that money on the people who really need it the most. But, Presiding Officer, the eyes of the world are going to be on us over the next 12 months as we shape up for the independence referendum, and we stand ready to join the family of nations as a full member. But again, we find self-belief and vision so lacking, as Alistair Darling makes claims that Scotland would struggle on the world stage and would not have the reputation of the UK in international affairs. I'm not entirely sure that is necessarily a bad thing, Presiding Officer, but it's worth pausing to look at nations around us, to look at the pivotal role that Norway has played during the course of the Middle East peace process, to look at the exemplary record of Ireland when it comes to contributions to United Nations peacekeeping missions, to see that being a big country waving your guns around and swaggering on the world stage does not necessarily make you a key contributor to world affairs. All too often, the UK's reputation is that of those hiding behind the playground bully and occasionally peeking out to say, yeah, in support. That is not the reputation I want for Scotland on the international stage. We can do better. We will do better.
Many thanks. Now call on James Kelly to be followed by Christina McKelvey.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. You would think that in considering the programme for government, the ministers might have taken some time over the recess to exit their ministerial offices and to look at what is actually happening in the country. Because if they had done, they would realise, they would see the cost of living crisis, the 6.4% real terms drop in wages that workers are having to suffer, the 25% drop in homes built, resulting in a housing crisis with a potential shortfall of 160,000 homes in 2035, and the scandal of zero-hour contracts where workers are being exploited. But we're not seeing any of these. Let me make some progress. We're not seeing any of these issues being addressed in the programme for government. The SNP government and its team of backbenchers have become a team of one-trick ponies, stuck on the record, playing continually to the tune of independence. And if you take one example where legislation is being brought forward, the procurement bill, it doesn't exactly inspire confidence. As Alison Johnson quite rightly says, there's £9 billion spent there, and we need to look at how that is spent advantageously for local economies. But we can hardly be inspired by confidence when we see that Sir Peter Housden is going to have to appear before the Audit Committee tomorrow to explain £500 million of unreported costs. I mean, £500 million, it's hardly the amount of money that you lose down the back of the settee. How can we have confidence in procurement when there's no control and transparency over these key transport projects? I'll give way to Mark MacDonald, no doubt fresh from the Hadigan roundabout. He probably left last Tuesday to reach the chamber.
Mark MacDonald.
I thank the member for giving way. He mentions zero-hours contracts, paying conditions and expenditure on housing. Can you remind the Chamber where employment law and capital spending for this Parliament decisions are taken?
Ms Kelly.
In terms of what this chamber is responsible for, you might look at the Borders Rail project and some of the examples of zero-hour contracts there. That is a Scottish Government responsibility. And what this government should be doing in terms of the procurement bill is it should be looking at addressing some of these issues. How can we introduce a living wage to some of these contracts that are being handed out by the Scottish Government? How can we tackle the issue of blacklisting, something that the SNP MSPs were very silent on before the recess? It's an absolute scandal that trade unionists should be penalised for their activities and be blacklisted, and that's something we should be examining closely. We should also be looking seriously at how we can support apprenticeships and training programmes, not only to support businesses, but also to support young people and to support the economy. And Labour will be examining these issues in the procurement bill. There's also a complete absence of anything to do with buses, which is a big issue in local communities. And we know why that is, because the SNP government have cut the reimbursement rates for concessionary travel. And what that means, and bus operators have told me this in my constituency, that routes have been cut because these reimbursement rates have been cut. And that means that pensioners and people in local communities are being left stranded without bus rates. But the attitude of the SNP to that is to shut their eyes and pretend that it's not happened. Some of the proposals in Ian Gray's bus bill would help tackle these issues. The tragedy about the SNP's obsession with independence is it's undermined our ability as a Parliament to deal with the issues affecting hundreds of thousands of Scots. While we were mired in a housing crisis, we were taking time to debate the 10-year anniversary of the Iraq War. And while thousands of food parcels are handed out in communities every week. The First Minister and his government have armies of civil servants looking at the independence referendum issue. And while pensioners are stranded as a result of bus routes being axed, the government rushes out yet another consultation. In summing up, Deputy Presiding Officer, the SNP government are too busy talking to themselves instead of standing up for Scotland. This is not the time for a time-out. The Scottish Government needs a plan of action now that addresses the anxieties and the problems of Scotland's communities in 2013.
Many thanks. I now call on Christina McKelvey to be followed by Ken McIntosh. The generous 6 minutes.
Deputy Presiding Officer, as we look on virtually helpless, we see Ian Duncan-Smith and his coalition colleagues damning the most vulnerable in our society to a future of hopelessness and financial misery. As the bankers and the Tory donors are bought off with tax dispensations and bonuses, the poor, the sick and the struggling must be made to pay for them. Deputy Presiding Officer, in the post-war years, with the NHS and family allowance coming on stream, there was a belief that government was beginning to turn around the great divide between rich and poor and north and south. Now look what has happened in the space of just a few months. The notion of any sort of movement towards equality and of real diminution of child poverty, something that this Scottish Parliament has made good efforts to tackle since its instigation, has not only been arrested, the tide has been reversed. That women and families are disproportionately affected by the UK Government's benefit reform programme can hardly come as any surprise to its leaders. Patrick.
Harvey.
To the member for giving way. And I agree with much of what she says, but the change has not been a matter of a few months. The change has been a matter of decades since the post-war consensus was thrown out. And arguments like tax competition have been a big part of that, a big part of the reason why we've moved away from that trend toward equality. Shouldn't Scotland be rejecting arguments like tax competition rather than attempting a new generation of the same thing?
Christina McKelvey.
I think Patrick Harvey makes a very relevant point. The points that I'll go on to outline here are the changes in the past few months. I take on board completely what you said about the past decades, but the changes that I'm about to talk about have only happened in the past few months. Deputy Presiding Officer, the National Children's Bureau produced a report last week that found up to 1.5 million more children are growing up in poor households than in 1973. That's UK progress for you. The freeze in child benefit, the benefit cap, reduction in proportion of childcare costs covering working tax credit, increase in the taper rate for all tax credits, removal of the baby element of child tax credits, the requirement for lone parents and income support with a youngest child of 5 to move to job seekers allowance, abolition of the health and pregnancy grant, and that's all before the assault of the bedroom tax, where families have the audacity to give their 2 children separate rooms, or those with disabilities need space for special equipment. All attacks on equality for women in our society. As Deputy First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said last week, this Scottish Government is doing all it can to mitigate the problems within the resources and powers available to it. So what do we have? We have the tale of 2 governments and the choice of 2 futures. We are at a crossroads in our nation. The choice is an SNP government providing an extra £9.2 million towards the new £33 million Scottish Welfare Fund. That fund has already helped more than 20,000 people and it has the capacity to support around 200,000, something we should all be promoting in our local authorities. And I commend that this has been put on a statutory footing. But our powers are limited. Only with a yes vote can Scotland's government set about creating a fair, caring and compassionate welfare system that does not punish those who are sick, poor or vulnerable. Ours will. I believe, and it would be positive and constructive and supportive approach rather than one implying blame or labelling people benefit scroungers. Everyone working for and supported by the Scottish Commonweal. As colleagues in this chamber are already aware, I have a close and very personal interest in the lives of those who suffer with motor neuron disease. Victims of MND live on average for 14 months from diagnosis. Having been assaulted in 2008 by the Work Capability Assessment, the sufferers now have to be put through the mill of DWP welfare benefits assessments, questionnaires, appeals and the worry that they might not be able to support themselves financially through such a traumatic time. And it seems to me downright malevolent to force a terminally ill person to go through this, to say nothing of the waste of taxpayers' money in doing so. People with MND don't get better. They get worse and they die. But this Westminster Government believes that unless you are likely to die within 6 months, you are not terminally ill. And you may well be considered fit for work, as many MND sufferers have already been told, and their benefits withdrawn. Then there's the bedroom tax issue again. You lose your job because you are no longer physically capable of work. You need special adaptations to cope at home. You need kit like a wheelchair or breathing equipment to keep you safe overnight, and it all takes up a lot of space in your bedroom. So not surprisingly, your carer, who is probably your spouse, may well also have to give up their work to look after you, needs a second room to catch up on the much-needed sleep they need to care for that person through the day. And for that privilege, this family is expected to pay £12 a week. Lord Freud, you know him, Lord Freud, employed by the Tories over there, continued in employment by the Tories over here, said in a letter to me this week that the options people have, in some cases, and I quote, could include taking in a lodger, finding work, or increasing your hours of work. How disgustingly out of touch he is. And not only that, he directly contradicted his own Prime Minister. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that child poverty and discrimination against the most vulnerable and poorest in our society increases the gap between rich and poor. The no parties need to ask themselves if they really want to back policies designed to militate against the most needy and reward the wealthiest. With independence come both the responsibility and the freedom for Scotland to make its own choices. Policies that do not condemn the already struggling to social exclusion. At the last count, we are talking about 80,000 of Scotland's most vulnerable families. The UK is the fourth most unequal country in the developed world. An independent Scotland would be the fourth most equal, resting alongside other nations, small independent nations like Norway, Denmark and Sweden and Finland. And what has the No campaign got to offer? A continuation of the increasing divergence between rich getting richer and poor getting poorer. Presiding officer, we have a choice of two futures. I say choose independence and choose a fairer Scotland.
Many thanks. Now call on Ken McIntosh to be followed by Bruce Crawford, a generous 6 minutes with time for interventions.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and dare I say it's good to be back. The summer recess is often our only opportunity to pause, to take stock, to come back with fresh ideas, although I admit in my own case I ended up with a little more time than I was expecting. And, Presiding Officer, there is much in the Government's programme that my Labour colleagues and I welcome. The Children and Young People Bill, while it could go further, will hopefully make a difference to the provision of care for 3- and 4-year-olds. The Public Bodies Joint Working Bill will bring to the fore the discussion once again about how we deliver social care. The Community Empowerment and Renew Bill could provide an opportunity to involve local communities in their own decision-making. But, Presiding Officer, this does not feel like the sort of legislative programme that will tackle the major problems facing Scotland on the economy, on the cost of living or tackling inequality, in creating the sort of modern Scotland that I believe many, if not most of us across this chamber wish to see. In fact, while the countdown clocks in SNP headquarters may be clicking over the 380 days to next September, this legislative programme suggests that many have forgotten there are still 1,000 days left in government. 1,000 days to modernise our education system, to get young people off the dole and into work, to rebuild confidence in our besieged college sector. 1,000 days to change the way business is conducted in Scotland, to support small businesses, not multinationals, to protect workers from zero-hour contracts, to introduce a strategic plan to get a living wage programme. 1,000 days to implement radical land reform, the likes of which we saw in the early days of this Parliament, to promote community ownership, to encourage new cooperative and collaborative ways of delivering the rail system, to protect bus users with robust regulation. Presiding Officer, as I alluded to earlier, I will admit to having a little laugh at my own career trajectory, from government supporter to shadow minister to opposition backbencher. But can I suggest to SNP colleagues who may believe they are enjoying the political good times that you are never more conscious of the opportunity to make a difference when that opportunity is taken away from you. And by that, I simply mean make the most of your time in government. Do not put all your political eggs in the basket of independence and then be disappointed when they break. Presiding Officer, there is so much we can do right here and right now to help the people of this country. Mr Brown, the Transport Minister, is currently presiding over the allocation of the Scottish Rail passenger franchise. At more than £2.5 billion, it's one of the biggest contracts handled by the Scottish Government. And I know I'm not alone in believing that we can get better value and a better service for that money. Now, we can agree across this chamber that it's not fair nor is it right that a Dutch government firm or a German government firm can bid for this contract, but not a Scottish government firm. But where we seem to part company is that I believe we can do more than just rail against the iniquities, and pardon the pun. We can do more than just rail against the iniquities of rail privatisation and an unsympathetic Tory government. We can do something about it. The power to award the franchise lies with this government here in Scotland and with this Parliament here in Holyrood. In the next few weeks, the Cooperative Party and others, including the rail union ASLEF, intend to publish a document highlighting the many benefits that would flow to the Scottish public, to rail passengers, to our industry and transport infrastructure, if only we were to pursue a more cooperative and collaborative approach to running this public service. I ask only that Mr Brown, his ministerial colleagues and the many SNP MSPs who I believe will be sympathetic look at this document with a view to shaping the way they award the new passenger franchise. It's a decision that's likely to be in place for the next 10 years. Once taken, it's unlikely that the referendum, whichever way the vote goes, will affect it. So why not start shaping the new Scotland right now? And rail is just one area where I believe there is... Yes, Mr Hepburn.
Without having read the document, it sounds as though I may be sympathetic to that argument. Would Mr Macintosh not accept, whilst the awarding of the franchise is devolved, the terms of that franchise are hugely encumbered and set by Westminster at this moment in time?
Mr Hepburn seems to make the very point. He just emphasises the very point I'm trying to make. Why are you always looking at things that you can't do rather than look at the things you can do? You can shape the franchise. You could promote social enterprise. You could promote community benefit. You could promote worker cooperation. All of these things are within your power. You could run a not-for-profit company with this franchise if you had the political will, and we have the political will because we would join you in supporting that. Tomorrow evening, I hope to join John Wilson and others in the SNP and across the chamber in welcoming and debating Oxfam's report on the economy. We often pride ourselves in Scotland on being a more progressive country than the rest of the UK, more altruistic, less selfish in our politics and our voting intentions. And I'm conscious today, Presiding Officer, that David McCletchie would describe that claim as a moot point. But it's one I would at least like this government to pursue and to explore. Why can we not set an example in pursuing a more ethical economy? If we believe it is morally right for people and companies to pay their taxes, to pay for the schools and hospitals that we enjoy and we need, is there not more this Scottish Government can do to support that culture of social responsibility? The Ministers and the SNP and my colleagues know how strongly I feel and how colleagues feel about us handing over millions of pounds of taxpayers' money to companies like Amazon. But rather than excuse or explain how we ended up subsidising an immensely profitable multinational, can we not introduce a set of criteria that favours local, small businesses? Government procurement is not the most radical reforming agenda, but as Alison Johnson and James Kelly have already pointed out, it could provide an opportunity for the government to make a statement about the economic values it holds dear. Why not use it to promote not just Scottish small businesses, but good working practices, union recognition, or the living wage? People do not want to have dead-end jobs or exploitative jobs. We don't want zero-hours contracts. And this government and this Parliament could do something about that right now. I was going to make a point about education, Presiding Officer, but I'll move to my conclusion. I worry that today we are debating the platform of government with only one objective: independence. And in the meantime, Scotland, unfortunately, is on hold. If this government could see beyond the referendum, they would see that the issues on people's minds are to do with their jobs, their livelihoods. It's to do with their education and future prospects for their children, not constitutional change. We didn't need independence to deliver the smoking ban. We didn't need independence to rebuild all our schools, to introduce free personal care or the free bus pass for the elderly. We don't need it to oppose privatisation of the NHS. We did all of these through devolution, and it's through devolution, through the powers and political will of this Parliament, we can build the new progressive Scotland.
Many thanks. I now call on Bruce Crawford to be followed by Gavin Brown.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm very pleased to have been asked to contribute to this very important debate today on the Government's programme. Those of you who have had ministerial experience will know that the content of a Government's programme is a culmination of months and months of hard work. Behind the scenes, many dedicated and committed individuals have been working away hard, be that ministers, special advisers or civil servants. And as for the document itself, from experience, the Minister responsible will be feeling some relief that it's finally printed and been at the back of the chamber. But they, along with the First Minister and other ministers, should also take some satisfaction that after more than 8 years in government, they're still delivering so effectively on behalf of the Scottish people. A government that continues to demonstrate that they are an experienced team who work together on behalf of the people of Scotland and always put Scotland first. They have a record to be proud of and are still driving forward positively to improve the quality of life of our citizens. But most importantly of all, that they have a vision for the future that is about hope, aspiration and taking Scotland forward. A future in which the people of Scotland themselves will gain from having responsibility for the political and economic direction that this nation takes. With just over a year to go to the referendum, this debate is not only an opportunity to consider some of the Government's significant proposals in the programme, and in particular, I welcome the announcement on the Housing Bill, the Community Empowerment and Renewable Bill, and the Court Reform Bill. But it's also a chance for us to have a quick look back at the gains that this Parliament has brought to the people of Scotland since the advent of devolution. Gains that simply would never have been achievable if decisions in these areas had been left to Westminster. And here I pay tribute to the former Labour and Liberal coalition of the first 8 years, who, for instance, as already heard others suggest today, ushered in leading legislation on land reform legislation, or indeed ensured free care for the elderly in Scotland. Similar tribute can be paid to this Parliament and an SNP government that swept away tuition fees, scrapped prescription charges, kept its promises to deliver an extra 1,000 police officers. None of these gains would have been possible had the reins of responsibility remained at Westminster. There are many more demonstrations of how Scotland is making more appropriate choices for its future as a result of responsibility resting here in Edinburgh. But perhaps the most notable, as was alluded to by the First Minister, is Scotland's National Health Service. A National Health Service that is what it says on the tin, not the fragmented organisation south of the border that's in danger of meltdown as a result of Westminster flawed policy choices. And in regard to health matters, I'm also pleased to see the Health and Adults with Incapacity Bill in this programme, a bill that's important to protect people who are vulnerable. In making the comments I'm making today, though, I don't do so to applaud the actions of any one party, any one organisation in this Parliament, but I do so for this institution, this place called Holyrood, and this Parliament of Scotland. Over the years, the direction that Parliament has set for Scotland has only served to deepen my belief about who the best people are to make the decisions about our future. And by that I mean the people who happen to live and work here themselves in Scotland. They are the people who self-evidently have more invested in her future and therefore are much more likely to make the appropriate decisions and make better choices. I believe that the creation of this Parliament has demonstrated beyond doubt that Scotland has gained through having more responsibility in their own hands. And the Revenue and Tax Powers Bill is a historic but small first step, as was described by the First Minister. But you know, it's now time to put responsibility for the full range of powers in the hands of these same people. It is time to give the people of Scotland the opportunity to create new gains, to make better choices through setting their own direction. The opportunity, for instance, to decide for themselves, if they so choose, to say no to a new generation of weapons of mass destruction based on the Clyde. Giving Scotland the opportunity to gain hugely from not having to take part in what is no more than a vanity project. a project that is unjustifiable on moral, environmental, strategic or economic arguments. Unfortunately now, though, all unionist parties are committed to throwing untold billions of pounds at a new generation of nuclear weapons based in Scotland. And as the First Minister said earlier, last year the UK Government announced £350 million more of spending on the next stage of Trident renewal, a sum that is barely 1/3 of 1% of the £100 billion of a total lifetime cost to replace Trident. I just can't understand for the life of me why we're even having that argument, why Scotland can't make its own decision, while at the same time we've got a government in Westminster not only committed to spending all that money on Trident, but who are bringing in the bedroom tax and cuts, creating such misery in so many of our homes across Scotland. But there is one undeniable fact, is that there is a significant majority of people and the majority of parliamentarians, elected parliamentarians from Scotland, who are opposed to abhorrent weapons. But no matter that, Westminster will still decide to proceed to commit these billions and billions of pounds on a project that, frankly, is not worth the pennies that are being spent on it. The evidence is very clear for everyone to see in these circumstances. The only democratic means by which we can halt the madness, yes, the madness, of sighting of new generation of nuclear weapons, only a few miles from our largest city of Glasgow, is independence. And I hope and I pray that when we get to September next year, that that's what Scotland delivers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now call Gavin Brown to be followed by Aileen MacLeod.
Presiding officer, there have been times during this debate where you could have been forgiven for not realising that we were debating the Scottish Government's legislative programme for 2013-14. There has been the occasional time in the debate where you could have realised that we were debating the Scottish Government's legislative programme for 2013-14. Most on the opposition benches, most on the government benches, I should say, the SNP benches, do not want to talk about their legislative programme. We listened carefully to the bills that were outlined in minute detail, I have to say, during the First Minister's statement. Some of those bills we on this side of the chamber will happily support, I'm sure. Some of them we will want to examine and amend, and others I'm quite sure we will ultimately reject. But the totality of the programme on offer today, I have to say, is relatively thin. For a government with an inbuilt majority, for a government that could take fundamental reforms to a whole range of systems in our country, it is a pretty thin offering. But let's focus on some of the details that we did hear. Let's start with one of the big announcements today, which was in relation to automatic early release. And this was classic Scottish Government speak. They ignored the fact that the Conservative Party had formal plans to reverse automatic early release. They blamed the former UK government, they blamed the Liberal Labour executive for not reversing it, but conveniently ignored the fact that for 6 years in power, they had failed to reverse automatic early release. We had a statement of fine principle. We have now all accepted the need to end the system of automatic early release. It does not command public confidence. And then moments later, we are ending it for some people. Now, we welcome any reversal of automatic early release. I'm happy to give way to Mr Hepburn.
Jamie Hepburn.
I wonder, for the benefit of the public record, if the member could remind us who introduced early automatic release.
Gavin Brown.
I think that's already on the public record a number of times. I think I just said it as well, but I say so again. It was introduced in 1993 by a Conservative government, who then in 1997 sought to reverse it. But the reality is, despite this fine statement of principle, they are only reversing it for a minority, for a very small number of offenders. And I think there needs to be an explanation from the government what percentage of offenders would be taken under this new proposal, and why, if it is such a strong principle with which we agree, why is it only happening to such a small number of offenders? We heard from the First Minister about the Courts Reform Bill, another bill which we will examine in detail. Lord Gill's initial report, I have to say, was a weighty one. But one of the elements of that reform bill, and the Justice Minister may want to respond to this, one of the elements of that bill is it gives far more work to sheriff courts. It gives far more work to sheriff courts to do. Now, we're giving these sheriff courts more work to do tomorrow, but the slight problem is we shut many of these sheriff courts yesterday. And perhaps the Justice Minister might like to explain to us how you give them far more work while shutting them at the same time. Because as the First Minister said himself when referring to the UK government, some people see the price of these policies, not their value. And that would apply equally to this government's decision to close down numerous sheriff courts across the country. Now, we had the usual hyperbole, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government is basically creating a quango by the name of Revenue Scotland. Revenue Scotland, incidentally, already exists, but this quango will be responsible for the collection of the landfill tax and the land and buildings transactions tax. How is this described by the Scottish Government? Establishing Revenue Scotland is a historic step, setting up a tax quango to pick up two taxes. They're not even collecting the tax, they're overseeing the collection of the tax, a minor detail, but this is a historic step. Well, I would not like to see something that isn't a historic step, Deputy Presiding Officer, if setting them up is such a major step. And while we're on the go, perhaps the Government, in responding, or any SNP member, can explain to us what is happening with the Procurement Reform Bill. We welcomed this when it was announced in 2011. We welcomed this when it was re-announced in 2012. We would welcome it. I didn't hear any discussion. People have said they welcomed it, but I didn't hear any discussion from the Government today about the Procurement Reform Bill. And when I checked this morning, it hadn't yet been lodged. It seems to have been delayed, rather like, with some irony, most of the Scottish Government's procurement projects. Deputy Presiding Officer, in closing, over the course of the last few years, we've heard numerous new bits of language described as a consequence of the recession. A zombie debtor is an indebted consumer who's only able to pay the debt interest each month. A zombie company is a company that does the bare minimum in order to exist as a company. We now have, with the SNP, Deputy Presiding Officer, a zombie government. A government so focused on the referendum campaign, they do the bare minimum to exist as an actual government. And that's what we've heard from the government today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Aileen MacLeod to be followed by Jenny Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm delighted to speak in support of the Government's programme this afternoon. Today marks the beginning of a parliamentary session that will take us to within touching distance of the biggest decision that Scotland will take in 300 years. And in next September's referendum, the people in Scotland will be asked to choose between two futures. One future, the status quo, will see the power to determine Scotland's future retained in Westminster, exercised by a government that Scotland's voters did not elect, and imposing on Scotland economic and social policies that our people do not support and that harm the weakest and most vulnerable in our society. And the bedroom tax, as many speakers have already alluded to this afternoon, is but one example of the unfair and unjust measures that have been imposed on Scotland by a Westminster government. And now the alternative future, and that which I believe the people in Scotland will support, is one where our people are governed from a parliament that they have elected and that represents their interests. And as my colleague Bruce Crawford said in his excellent contribution, a Scottish Parliament that has since 1999 demonstrated its ability to deliver policies that reflect the values of Scottish society. A Parliament whose policies underline what has been to date a shared commitment to protecting the weak and vulnerable in our society, to creating a dynamic economy that can generate jobs and prosperity for our people, and a Parliament that adheres to the principle of universality in delivering essential public services that reflects the strong moral and ethical underpinnings of our collective approach to the Government of Scotland. And today's programme for Government, Presiding Officer, embodies and reflects these objectives and these values. And although we are today debating the Government's programme for the future, I think it is appropriate to reflect on what this Parliament has already achieved,
with the limited powers at its disposal. For example, we've introduced the smoking ban in public places, we've retained universal benefits in the form of free personal and nursing care for our elderly, benefiting more than 77,000 of our older people, free eye examinations for all, and abolished prescription charges. In so doing, this Parliament has delivered a national health service for the people in Scotland that remains free at the point of need, and that has not, and I hope never will, begun a process that many believe will see the NHS south of the border increasingly become driven by the dictates of the marketplace and not the needs of the patients or decisions made in the GP consulting room or the hospital ward. Presiding Officer, it's clear from these examples that the people in Scotland benefit the most when decisions about Scotland are taken in Scotland, and the programme for government set out today by the First Minister will build on the achievements made so far, and nowhere more so than in relation to our public health. This parliamentary term will see the passage of the Public Bodies Joint Working Bill to permit the integration of health and social care services, legislation that will improve greatly the health and well-being of our people, and which, along with the prioritisation of preventative spending, demonstrates this government's commitment to adhere to the principles set out in the Christie Commission on the future of public service delivery. And this agenda is taken forward under the programme for government through legislation to improve the operation and efficiency of mental health legislation for service users and practitioners, and with the Mental Health and Adults with Incapacity Bill, which I welcome greatly and which will help to protect our vulnerable, and also by provision to establish Scotland's own food safety and standards body, Food Standards Scotland, a body that will help us to address the significant food-related health challenges that Scotland faces and where consumer protection will be paramount. And I'm also particularly pleased that, unlike the Westminster Government, the Scottish Government will continue to move forward with its plans to introduce plain packaging for cigarettes and other tobacco products. And I firmly believe this to be one of the most important public health measures that can be taken in this country. And it is a matter of some regret that the UK Government has decided not to proceed with this legislation. Presiding Officer, our nation's health and well-being is one of the most important matters for which this Parliament has legislative responsibility. And I believe it is one in which this Parliament has a genuinely impressive track record throughout the period since 1999. And the measures outlined by the First Minister in the programme for government will build on that track record and demonstrate that this government and this Parliament can continue to deliver for the people in Scotland. Yet it remains the case that if this Parliament is to fully build on these successes and be in a position to tackle all of the underlying causes of our public health problems, not least the considerable inequality of income that has come to characterise this country under successive Westminster governments, this Parliament must have access to the full range of economic and social policy powers. And that is what independence is all about. It's not about empowering the SNP or this government. Rather, it is about empowering this Parliament to take the decisions and make the policies that are right for the people in Scotland. It is about putting the people first and ensuring that the politicians they vote for have the powers they need to deliver the policies they want and create the type of Scotland in which they want to live. To conclude, Presiding Officer, I welcome the Scottish Government's programme, and I'm also looking forward to the 18th of September next year, when we will have the opportunity as a nation to take control of our own destiny and begin to build a Scotland that reflects our values, our aspirations and our principles.
Thank you very much. Can I just remind members there's a little bit of time in hand if members wish to take interventions. I call Jenny Mara to be followed by Jamie Hepburn.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week, the Dundee Courier reported a 37% rise in shoplifting in our city. Shoplifting for food for people to survive. Meanwhile, food banks in our cities are inundated with hungry people driven to desperation to bear the indignity of asking for food to feed their families. The Trussell Trust, who have become sadly familiar to all of us through their food bank operation, last week reported that the use of food banks in my city has gone up by 120% and 400% across Scotland. Rising domestic energy prices, constantly rising food prices, and a freeze in wages have made it difficult, for some impossible, and that's even for those in work, to survive. And we all know that for those out of work it is more difficult. Our young people are still desperately struggling to find work. The number of 18 to 24-year-olds claiming job seekers allowance in Scotland has gone up 78% in the last year. The First Minister said this afternoon that our Parliament has demonstrated concern for the most vulnerable people in our society. I would contest, Presiding Officer, that this legislative programme does not match that assertion. He listed previous administration's achievements as the hallmark of this Parliament's success, and then presents us with a thin and uninspiring legislative programme that is supposed to match his bold assertions for our country. It falls woefully short. It does nothing to address the problems that families going through the doors of food banks this afternoon are facing, and nothing to address the scandalous waste of young people out of work. Presiding Officer, I will be shadowing under my new brief the bankruptcy bill, but hope sincerely that the Minister, Fergus Ewing, will produce a bill that will help and not penalise the financially marginalised in our communities. Less than a year ago, I asked John Swinney, the Finance Secretary, in the Justice Committee to justify his new fees for bankruptcy. He doubled the bankruptcy fees for people with low income and low assets in our communities. He doubled those fees from £100 to £200, despite warnings from Labour and from the Citizens Advice Bureau that those people would be turning to payday lenders to find their bankruptcy fees. Maybe the Finance Secretary didn't get the acronym, didn't realise that LILA stood for low income, low assets, but I really hope that the bankruptcy bill will be a bit more progressive this year. And there is nothing, absolutely nothing on the scandal of payday loans in our communities. But perhaps that is not very surprising, as the Minister Fergus Ewing's views on payday loans are very clear. My colleague Kezia Dugdale has been doing a power of work with my Labour colleagues, including Anne McTaggart, over the summer, campaigning hard on this issue. But in a letter to my colleague Kezia Dugdale, the Minister called payday loans legal, fair and transparent. Now, legal, currently, I'll give him, but debt is devolved into his hands, and so he holds the cards on this. But fair and transparent, I would imagine that Anne McTaggart will tell me that the people she's been speaking to in her community would not be telling her that these payday loans are fair and transparent. Yes.
Patrick Harvie.
I'm grateful, and once again there's an issue where I think we should all be able to find some common ground. But surely those who are on the no side of the independence debate have to acknowledge that with responsibility for debt and no power to regulate credit, we're in a bind. What is the solution to this if we don't have the ability to regulate the provision of credit?
Jenny Mara.
Patrick Harvie brings me neatly on to my next point, which is Labour's ask, because Joanne Lamont kindly gave us some ideas for the Scottish Government to fill out their legislative programme. But Labour has three key asks on this topic, and they are these: that we use the planning system, or the Government uses the planning system, to say no to payday loan shops in our communities, that the Scottish Government set up a... If you let me give the ideas...
Order, please.
That the Scottish Government set up a loan guarantee fund to help credit unions offer an alternative, and that they run a public awareness campaign on the dangers of these loans. Now, Bob Doris is calling these backdoor solutions, but I call it using the powers invested in this building to make a difference to people in our communities now. No, thank you. Presiding Officer, Joanne Lamont listed for the First Minister a list of initiatives that Labour would be taking to make a difference to people's lives now. Ian Gray's bus bill is desperately needed in the communities I represent. Labour's living wage bill, Richard Simpson's nutrition bill, starting to prevent ill health before it starts. My bill on human trafficking is designed to use the powers of this Parliament to make Scotland a no-go destination for traffickers. There is so much that can be done within our powers in this building, and they're not backdoor solutions. They are powerful solutions. World-leading experts on trafficking have said that the proposals in our consultation are some of the most radical and progressive in the world, but they are with powers invested in this building. This summer, the British government adopted a private members' bill in Westminster, very similar to Labour's proposals, and committed to driving it through the Commons. I am surprised that the Scottish Government is not taking the same approach, given that other devolved administrations within the UK are taking the initiative on human trafficking. The Scottish Government is falling rapidly behind on modern-day slavery in our communities. I had hoped to see a bill today, but perhaps the Cabinet Secretary for Justice will change his mind and think again.
Thank you. And I call Jamie Hepburn to be followed by Sandra White.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I welcome today's debate and the government programme before us. Can also welcome the First Minister's statement that set out that programme. I thought it was interesting to hear Joanne Lamont suggest that it's not in the First Minister's interest to set out to state what this Parliament can do. I can only presume she wasn't listening to the First Minister's statement. It was entirely imbued and throughout the statement the achievements of this Parliament, so perhaps the rhetoric doesn't match the reality. Can I focus on a couple of the specific bills that have been mentioned today? As a member of the Finance Committee, of this Parliament's Finance Committee, I've been able to undertake assessment of the Land and Buildings Transaction Tax and the Landfill Tax bills, the first legislation that this Parliament has ever considered in relation to taxation. So can I welcome the Revenue Scotland and Tax Powers Bill, which will, of course, as we know, establish Revenue Scotland as the tax authority responsible for Scotland's devolved taxes from the 1st of April 2015. And I do believe that is an important first step in taking on greater responsibility for setting and collecting taxes in Scotland. And it's entirely unclear to me as to why Gavin Brown doesn't think that this is the case. And now that we know he's so disinterested in the area of Revenue Scotland, I can look forward to him disengaging from any thorough and rigorous assessment of this bill when it comes before the Finance Committee. I'll gladly give way, Mr Brown.
Gavin Brown.
I'll take a very keen interest in it, Deputy Presiding Officer. But I just made the point, though, that to describe setting up a quango as a historic moment, I thought was slight overkill.
Jamie Hepburn.
Well, it's all about different opinions, isn't it, Mr Brown? I think the fact that this is the first time this Parliament has ever had the chance to bring forward legislation in relation to taxation could be described as historic, and that's my perspective on the matter. But in terms of the specific bill, we know that it will provide arrangements for resolving tax disputes quickly and efficiently, providing the public with confidence in the taxes we are establishing. And I think absolutely crucially, we know that it's good to look at how we can avoid avoidance of payment of devolved taxes. Too often we see avoidance, people trying to avoid paying the taxes that they should. And I think it's important we have that set out in legislation to try and avoid that scenario. And indeed, just as Mr Brown does, I look forward to scrutinising that legislation at the Finance Committee. And another way the Scottish Government is using the powers of this Parliament is with the Scottish Welfare Fund Bill. And as a member, as the Deputy Convener of the Welfare Reform Committee, Presiding Officer, I have a clear interest in this legislation. We know that the Scottish Government has already undertaken measures to support mitigation. The Scottish Government, working with COSLA, plugged Westminster's £40 million cut to council tax benefit, the council tax benefit budget for this year, ensuring, indeed.
Summer, I read that the First Minister was backing a benefit cap. It had quotation marks around it. It was in a Sunday Post. Can the member tell me when you're bringing a benefit cap forward, how much it will be for, and which Scots you want to implement it for?
Jamie Hepburn.
An interesting intervention when I'm talking about council tax benefit, Ms Davidson. I think the point I was going to make on that this move is ensuring that 560,000 people in Scotland are not impacted by the cut. Professor Steve Fothergill, that's a cut from the government at Westminster, which Ms Davidson supports, incidentally. Presiding Officer, and Professor Steve Fothergill from Sheffield Hallam University told the Welfare Reform Committee that this will ensure people in Scotland are comparatively better off as a consequence of that move. We've also seen around £8 million set aside to support advice agencies, and we've also seen the insurance of the continuity of the payment of passported benefits. These are important measures to protect people in Scotland. And of course the Welfare Fund is another important part of the Scottish Government working, using the powers of this Parliament to mitigate the effects of welfare reform, and again plugging the gap of the cut from the UK government. And we see, and Christina McKelvey made the point, that already 20,000 people have been assisted, and as the capacity to assist around 200,000. I think it's extraordinary to hear the Labour Party criticising this new fund. I would have thought they would be getting behind this fund, supporting this fund, but instead we hear criticism of the Scottish Government establishing the Scottish Welfare Fund. And I think it's particularly, and I'll let you in a minute, Ms Bailey, I think it's particularly peculiar when we see that research by the Children's Society finding that in England, funding for local welfare schemes have been cut in real terms by £150 million compared to equivalent funding in 2010. Not a scenario we have here in Scotland. Ms Bailey.
Jackie Bailey.
Can I thank the member for giving way? Does he not recognise that it's one thing to have a fund, but if you're sitting on the money and not distributing it to those in most need, it is frankly extraordinary.
Jamie Hepburn.
Well, I just don't see that as a real characterisation of what is actually happening on the ground.
Please.
And frankly, and I'll let you in a minute, Mr Gray, if you let me answer Ms Bailey. First of all, we'll come to you in a minute, Mr Gray.
Through the chair, please.
This is, beg your pardon, we'll come to you, Mr Gray, in a minute, presiding officer. The Welfare Fund is a new fund. We know it's a new fund. It's just been established. People are becoming more aware of it, and I think it would do the Labour Party better to get behind the fund instead of criticising it. I'll give way to Mr Gray.
Ian Gray.
Mr Hepburn must remember that we sit together in the Welfare Reform Committee, and on that committee, Labour members said that the government's guidelines for the Welfare Fund would ensure that not enough of the money would get out to the people who needed it. In the Western Isles, 90% less has been spent than was spent in the same period last year. We are behind the fund. What we said was right. It needs to be sorted.
Jamie Hepburn.
Well, I would remind Mr Gray he's not actually on the Welfare Reform Committee anymore. He's resigned from it. But I would also make the point that this is a new fund, and the funds have to be expended over the entirety of the year. So we'll look and see what the position is at the end of the year. But as much as I welcome, and of course we have the Welfare Fund putting this in a statutory foot, and I look forward to scrutinising that over the course of this coming period. But as much as I welcome these measures to mitigate against the effects of welfare reforms, I think we can surely aspire to more. When we see £2 billion per annum cut from benefit payments, when we see a disproportionate impact on women and families with children, we see a bedroom tax hitting tens of thousands of households introduced by a government that people in Scotland didn't vote for, surely we can aspire to more than just mitigation. When we see in a letter from Mark Hoban, MP, the Minister for Employment at Westminster, to Glasgow City Council, explaining, and this is the UK Government's apparent explanation for the increased reliance on food banks, and I quote directly, "The increased emphasis on reducing food waste may well be one of the drivers for the growth in the number of food banks and similar initiatives, and consequently the increased use by families." This is through the looking glass stuff, Presiding Officer. Why are we allowing these people to determine Scotland's welfare system for us here? I welcome the work that's done to mitigate, but I think we can aspire to more, and that's why I welcome the ongoing Scottish Government work, part of the Scottish Government work programme, the referendum bill, where we will have the chance to bring power back to the hands of the Scottish people, complete the powers of this Parliament, and do more than just mitigate and create a better society.
Thank you very much. And I now call Sandra White, to be followed by Malcolm Chisholm.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I've listened very carefully to all the contributions and speeches. And I'm really still trying to get my head around some of the opposition's contributions, if you can call it that. And I must say, I take great umbrage at some of the comments that came forward. And I did intend to start my comments in a very positive manner, and I will go on to this manner. But if I could just say to the opposition, and I think in particular Mr Macintosh, as a backbencher in the SNP, I didn't join the SNP for a career to be an MSP. I joined because I thought the best thing for the people of my country was an independent Scotland. And I take great umbrage at saying that. I also wonder where the opposition, particularly the Labour opposition, have been during the summer months. I, like many others, were out in constituencies talking to people. I know what the people in these areas in the Kelvin constituency, I know what they're thinking. and I know what they want. And they want a government that listens to them, not a government that talks them down and talks down to them. So I'll put that as my contribution just now. Yes, I'm happy to take an intervention.
James Kelly.
I just thank the member for giving way. I just wondered, when you were going round the Kelvin constituency, did you come across anybody on housing waiting lists which are getting longer and are failing to be tackled by the government's lack of strategy and cuts in the housing budget?
Sandra White.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that Mr Kelly raised that particular issue. I certainly did come across many people on the housing waiting list. I also came across some very caring and concerned housing associations who can't place people because of the bedroom tax and the problem that's coming from Westminster, which seems to be okay if you're in the opposition party and the people of Scotland have to do as they're told, and that's where I take great umbrage about the opposition. If I could just make some positive contributions, perhaps more than the opposition have had. And I would like to start my contribution by thanking the First Minister for his announcements today, a programme for government made in this Scottish Parliament for the Scottish people. And I do give a very positive welcome to the Scottish Government's position in still delivering 1,000 extra police officers. And we've got to remember that in Scotland, unlike England and Wales, where police numbers are absolutely falling catastrophically, and their salaries are also falling. We've got to remember that, all because of the Windsor report. We don't have that problem here in Scotland. I think we have to remember that. Now, these figures, I would have thought, would have been welcomed across the chamber. The Scottish people want a government and a parliament that works together for them, welcomes positive outcomes and able to hold the government to account when it's required. I don't see a problem in being able to welcoming that. And as a backbencher, I think I uphold that, and I do welcome the positive contributions from any particular member. And there's also much to be welcomed in the announcement today. Community Empowerment Bill, that's great. The Licensing Bill, Housing Bill, ending of automatic release, and many more. These are all to be welcomed. And I do think it is high time the opposition parties put aside their opposition for opposition's sake and work with this government to deliver what is best for Scotland and its communities. Now, the increase in police numbers, whilst it's not the only fact, has undoubtedly contributed to the lowest level of recorded crime for 37 years. 37 years in Scotland. I think that's something that we should all be proud of. And I would hope that the opposition members would have the maturity to actually acknowledge that this is part of a legislative programme which will go further, reduce crime and will make our communities much safer. Now, only last week, the Glasgow Evening Times ran an excellent article on crime in Glasgow, and the headlines were quite staggering if you want to listen to them. Since 2007, youth crime has fallen by almost half, knife assaults by 40%, something welcomed by the Labour leader, by the way, of Glasgow City Council, and something which has been credited in part to the Scottish Government's Cash Back for Communities programme. £50 million has been put into Cash Back for Communities, and that is something that we should be very proud of as well. And I want to thank personally all who have been involved in this, all the organisations, not only for making the communities safer, but very important, for empowering those in them to realise their own potential. That's something that we should be looking towards. The Community Empowerment Bill is one that I have long championed, and I echo the comments made by Alison Johnson. The potential is absolutely fantastic, and I will certainly follow its progress with great interest. Now, like Mark MacDonald, I welcome the licensing bill, and in particular the new licensing system for air guns. And, you know, it is really just a pity that the leader, Joanne Lamont of the Labour Party, did not even have the decency to mention this very important piece of legislation in her opening contributions. I also welcome the inclusion within the bill of the provision that will give local communities the power to regulate adult entertainment. Now, maybe some members might recall I did try to bring this legislation forward, but unfortunately the opposition parties voted it down. They did not support it. Maybe they'll support it this particular time, and that's all I'm going to say on that particular one. The Victims and Witnesses Bill. No, I'm sorry, Margaret, I don't have time. I don't have time. The Victims and Witnesses Bill, currently working its way through Parliament, is a bill which puts victims at the heart of the justice system, and I really do look forward to scrutinising further stages of this bill. As I said, there's many things to be proud of, but, Presiding Officer, we have heard today from everyone what this Parliament can do with the powers it has, and the successes it has so far achieved. And we've heard from other members of the successes which we can achieve in the future, and that can only be a good thing. However, I am also keenly aware of areas of our lives which we have no control over, and the decisions that are being taken by Westminster, by a government which is neither representative nor interested in the needs of Scotland. And it may come as a wee bit of a surprise to some of the opposition parties, but the Scottish people out there on the doorsteps, they're also aware of that. And I think you should realise that. They're also aware of that. These decisions are causing further inequality here in Scotland, further hardships for ordinary working folk, and pushing thousands into poverty. And that is Westminster legislation that is doing it. And that is the reality of not having full powers of a normal parliament. Now, I would hope that most of us here in this chamber today, and I do believe we do, want to see a fair and more equal society. And today serves also as a reminder that to achieve this, and this is probably where we differ, obviously, there's only one way forward, and that is for all the decisions which affect Scotland and the people of Scotland to be taken here in Scotland. And the only way to achieve that is a yes vote in September. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I remind members to speak through the chair and use full names when addressing other members? Malcolm Chisholm to be followed by Rob Gibson.
Presiding officer, I find this rather a difficult speech to make because I thought I'd be able to say something about a wide range of bills, but I find that there isn't a very great deal to say. And I think Alex Salmond, the First Minister, found exactly the same difficulty in his speech, because in 14 years I have never seen a legislative programme speech by a First Minister that had so little of its time devoted to the bills. I'm sure somebody will go away and analyse all 15 of those speeches, but I would be prepared to say and put on, to guess and even put on a bet that this is the lowest proportion of any of those speeches which actually deals with the bills themselves. And of course the reason for that is absolutely simple, because this was a speech about the referendum and a legislative programme about the referendum from a government that has transformed itself into a campaign. Now, the programme has been driven by two principles. Firstly, don't rock the boat. Clearly, if you want to win as many votes as possible in the referendum, you want to annoy as few people as possible in the next 12 months. And secondly, the whole underlying theme of the speech from the First Minister was trying to demonstrate what Scotland can't do rather than what it can. It certainly wasn't one of Nicola Sturgeon's finer moments on the radio this morning when she said the programme was radical and a programme for economic growth. Now, of course, being a fair-minded person, I will comment briefly on some bills which are interesting and potentially good for it. I think everyone has mentioned as their first choice the Community Empowerment Bill, so let's hope we can make something radical of that. I'm not sure if it's radical in its current form. We debated it 1 year ago, the consultation paper 1 year ago in Parliament this month, and lots of issues people can look at in the debate from then. It obviously builds belatedly on our own historic community right to buy, and hopefully that will be extended to urban areas, and hopefully it will become meaningful, because at the moment councils often say no, we can't really take an interest in a community group that wants the land because it's against European state aid rules, so that issue has to be confronted head on. The Revenue Scotland Bill I rather like too. Of course, I have to gently remind the administration that springs directly from the Scotland Act 2012, but yes, that is important to me because I want to build on the fiscal powers that we already have to create enhanced devolution, so I think that is a significant bill. The Housing Act is interesting. I have no objection to the abolition of the right to buy, but if the First Minister really thinks that that will make housing available to all, as he seemed to suggest, then really it's marginal for that. It's investment in new housing that is crucial for that. And finally, of course, I welcome the Mental Health Amendment Act springing from the McManus review of 4 years ago, building on our own historic Mental Health Act, which of course is another jewel in the crown of devolution. Now, near the beginning of his speech, the First Minister emphasised how the Scottish Parliament had demonstrated concern for the most vulnerable in society, although I don't think free personal care is necessarily the best example of that. But what have we got for the most vulnerable in society in this programme? That is the question for us today. Where is the serious drive against health inequalities? Where is the action on payday loans and the living wage? What about legislation on human trafficking, although thanks to Jerry Mara for filling that gap? And where are the further measures against the continuing scourge of domestic abuse, which for very understandable reasons are very much to the forefront of the Parliament and the public's mind today? Well, we all know what we think as a Parliament on the issue of that one particular individual, but let's not forget the progress that has been made and the further action that is required. We have a court bill before the Parliament today, which I think is addressing other issues to deal with the Court of Session and so on. But we all saw the story in the Herald last week about the way in which the great domestic abuse court in Glasgow is now running into difficulty. So let's address that problem. And while I welcome the setting up of a domestic abuse court in Edinburgh, I was just discussing with Alison Johnson a moment ago how that only serves sections of Edinburgh and not the whole of Edinburgh. So why don't we address those issues in terms of the protection of the victims of domestic abuse? And we also need to look, of course, at some of the provisions in the Criminal Justice Act, where Scottish Women's Aid have put in a very long submission highlighting concerns about some of the effects of that legislation on victims. So I think, as well as taking action on the member who should not be a member of this Parliament, let's drive forward at the same time and build on the great work we've done over the last 14 years on that issue. But finally, where is there anything about the bedroom tax, except rhetoric against laws from London? This is the classic example, the best example of all, that emphasises what we can't do and forgets what we can do. I give way.
I thank the member for giving way, but surely Malcolm Chisholm will recognise that alongside the bedroom tax there are a range of other welfare reforms which are impacting on his constituents and my constituents. And the simple fact is that by selecting the bedroom tax above other welfare reform agendas within the fixed budget of the Scottish Government would lead to pressure to move resources to other elements of welfare reform. Would it not be simply better if we were taking those decisions here in this chamber rather than picking and choosing between which welfare reforms we mitigate and which we do not?
Malcolm Chisholm.
Well, that was a very nice try and deflect us from the issue of the bedroom tax, but the simple fact...
Could I have Malcolm Chisholm's microphone, please?
That was a very, I don't know if it was heard or not, a nice try and deflect us from the issue of the bedroom tax, but the simple fact of the matter is that it is the Scottish Government and the SNP who relentlessly use the bedroom tax, I would say, as almost the #1 piece of ammunition against the UK Government, but they do not... They forget what they could do as a Scottish Government to mitigate the effects of that tax. But fortunately, Labour has not forgotten, as Ian Gray made clear yesterday, and as I hope we will hear more about in due course. I think I'm out of time.
Thank you. Rob Gibson, to be followed by Margot MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome this programme for government that tackles vital and urgent matters and remind members that there are a number of other bills already in train which do the same. I'm glad to serve on the Scottish Independence Referendum Bill, one of these which can bring about major changes in Scotland, which can allow us to have the powers that we do not have at the present. But I'd like to concentrate on the questions affecting rural Scotland, which faces the same choices as the rest of the nation next September. With a no vote, we face a future without the powers to transform Scotland, unable to represent our vital farming, fishing or food interests in Europe, and where the needs of Scotland are seldom the UK Government's priority. As my committee, the RACE Committee, had heard from the UK Environment Secretary when he rubbed that in last June. With a yes vote, however, we will have the normal powers and responsibilities of an independent nation with a seat at the top table defending our rural interests. Presiding Officer, rural Scotland will welcome this programme of government. For example, the Food Standards Scotland Bill, which, unlike Westminster, will ensure that the vital functions of the FSA remain together to ensure its primary function is consumer protection. After all, the horse meat scare, that is all the more important to protect the reputation of Scotland's booming food and drink industries. The Community Empowerment Bill can increase participation in decision-taking and in the design and delivery of services in local areas and take over public assets for local uses through the community right to buy. Something that I believed in for many years and something that I think can be achieved by this government. But underpinning that, in a tax and financial sense and fiscal sense, the Revenue Scotland and Tax Powers Bill and the Tax Management Bills create the possibility for a distinctive structure and a framework that will apply to all devolved taxes, but also potentially to more taxes when Scotland demands to have these, and independence will certainly demand many more. I'll give you an example of why this is needed. Land reform needs these tax powers and a lot more. In fact, since in the days of devolution, before devolution, the House of Lords could block the abolition of the feudal system in the Westminster Parliament. People recognised that then. Since 1999, Holyrood has abolished the feudal system, codified access laws and reformed crofting and some aspects of tenant farming, but not as much as we'd like. However, James Hunter and others have pointed out this summer in a briefing paper for the House of Commons Scottish Affairs Committee something that highlights the most concentrated pattern of land ownership in Europe. 432 owners of half of the private land in Scotland. And he wrote, adept at maximising flows of public money to their estates, landowners have been equally skilled at minimising the flow of cash in the other direction. Helped greatly in this regard by successive, and I would add, Westminster governments' toleration of a series of arrangements intended to reduce greatly or even eliminate effective taxation of landed wealth. These arrangements include the various inheritance and capital gains tax reliefs allowances available to landowners, the vesting of ownership in companies, foundations and other entities whose beneficiaries are obscured and concealed, the registration of such entities in offshore tax havens such as Grand Cayman, the British Virgin Islands, Panama and Guernsey. These are all reserved matters. We cannot effect radical land reform till we have those powers. And there is no chance in 100 years that the Tories, the Liberals, the Labour governments, and certainly not if UKIP's in any of the future coalitions, will make such a move. Hunter goes on to say, and justify this, although there's beginning to be anger in some quarters about such largesse, much of it directed at people of great wealth, at a time of unprecedented stringency in other areas of public spending, these arrangements have attracted surprisingly little scrutiny in Westminster and accordingly merit investigation by the Scottish Affairs Committee. Scotland needs, certainly Mr Gray.
Ian Gray.
Like him, I'm no great supporter of tax havens, but that was why I was a bit puzzled to see early in the summer his First Minister make a speech which seemed to imply that Scotland should be a tax haven like Guernsey and the Channel Islands.
Rob Gibson.
I think that's a diversion from the facts that we are facing in this legislative programme. Very much a diversion. Labour in April promised radical land reform. Not one piece of flesh has been put on the bones of that either since then or today. Even the Lib Dems are set to discuss land reform at their autumn conference. No doubt they will summon up the Gladstonian spirit and promise more half measures. The Scottish Affairs Committee can investigate anything they like, but only independence can deliver the gains of land reform to the Scottish economy, the environment and society. And this year's work by the Scottish Government in the Land Reform Review Group, which is part of the programme of government, will lay the proposals for taking those radical steps next year. During this session, the Scottish Government will tackle current issues of concern in rural Scotland. I've outlined some of them, but devolution has to be a step along the way, as we've seen. But however all these issues I have outlined in the programme for government need the full powers of independence to ensure a fairer and more successful Scotland. Presiding Officer, we need to make sure that we get better than devolution, because devolution is a limited offer that isn't up to Scotland's needs.
Thank you. Now call Margot MacDonald with a very generous 6 minutes to be followed by Kenny McCaskill.
6 minutes. Thank you so much, Presiding Officer. Where will I start? I think, first of all, just to put a few people right on a few things. Joanne Lamont should remember that it wasn't because Labour got gubbed and it had to find a way of coming back to some prominence and some usefulness in Scotland that we started with devolution. Some of us have wanted devolution and then transfer of power to Scotland for 40 years, and along the line managed to join in and help with the UCS campaign, the housing campaigns, and any number that I could mention. I've got the battle scars from these campaigns too, because to me they're indivisible from the means that we're trying to find to best govern ourselves, and you have to look at it in totality. And so therefore there must be an awful lot of people in here, Presiding Officer, with fairies living at the bottom of their garden, if they thought they could get through this year and completely separate the government programme from the principle that we have to decide. That's why I wouldn't have done it the way Alex Salmond did it, but I told them that a while ago. However, we are where we are. And so therefore the government's programme, it does look thin in places, but it shows potential in other places for folk like the front bench there, who come up with some pretty good ideas in this debate to make sure that they get them onto the legislative programme, and for the government to be magnanimous enough to say, oh, that's a good idea. Right, I'll start now with where I wanted to start on the No campaign, because that was, I thought, figuring far too large in much of what was said from the other side of the chamber, because they just seem to parrot, Presiding Officer, what I've heard Scotland couldn't do, and the fact that we've got to have broad shoulders to make the same mistakes as I've made in London. No, you can do that with shoulders like sauce bottles. But James Kelly complained about civil servants who were working for the government to produce ideas for the White Paper. What does he say about half of Whitehall being tied up, finding things? But before I get on to the other things I want to talk about, I want to say how much I agreed with the Tories on corroboration. I think we must hold on to that. It's one of the jewels of the Scottish system, and perhaps we should be considering whether someone should be, instead of guilty or not guilty, they should be proved or not proved, which also takes care of the third verdict. My colleague here in front of me, who talked about the lack of government attention to physical activity in this programme, was speaking truth, but she also could do a great deal, because she's got loads of good ideas on how you get the community involved in promoting physical activity. Now we're going to the White Paper, because I make no apologies for it. It is the most important paper that will ever have come before this Parliament. And so therefore, I think we are entitled to look at it in a somewhat different light. Now, for that reason, I think the government have got to understand that although White Papers usually signal a government's intention as regards implementing its policies, this one has to be better than that. It has to hold out the various options in several of the policy areas that the Scots might choose. For example, the First Minister, I have heard him often say it, we will be a monarchy. And I think, maybe he's aye and maybe he's no. Because I think that is a decision that should be taken by the Scots individually. What sort of head of state do they want? Do they want a monarchy? Do they want the monarchy they've got? Do they want a president? Do they want a Senate and choose someone from the Senate? Do they want to have a head of state at all? Now, these are options, all of them legitimate, and I think that the White Paper should encompass these. Now, I've only talked about the monarchy, now we'll talk about the difficult things. We have to control our borders. We have to determine who comes in and out of Scotland, and we should be quite blunt about it. We're very stupid if we say otherwise, because south of our border, there's going to be a huge debate about how population is controlled, and I think any country has the right to say who comes to live within its boundaries and how many people come in any one year and so on. You can do that without being racist and without being exclusive, and we should be honest about it, because everybody's beginning to duck out in case they're labelled extremist and racist. That's a couple of the things that I think we might look at in the ways in which they're presented in this white paper. Not merely what the government says. The government can say which it prefers, which it advises, but it should say what the choices are. Because people have been asking for information, and that's what folk on the other side of the Parliament don't seem to realise. If you go to any opinion poll and look at it, you find the majority of folk saying, I don't know enough about this. Well, the way to find out about it is look at the normal business of government and hold it up against the options for change that you're suggesting. Now, the Labour Party say that they are suggesting options for change too. Well, don't stick in the mud about it. Let's see them. Let's hear them. You roll out a white paper as well. You're supposed to want, as far as the Labour Party is supposed to want, maximus devolution. Right, let's see it in paper. It doesn't make me in any way afraid, because I think the Scots will realise that if they vote no, and the day after they vote no, the whole place will realise what a wound it has inflicted in the body of Scotland. And they won't. We've gone too far for us either to stall or turn back. And that's why I think at the end of the day, the Scots will vote yes. They'll be full of doubts and they'll be full of complaints and there'll be terrific jokes against ourselves. That's us. But we will vote, I think, to go on, because if we don't, if we vote to stick in the same place, we will be a laughingstock. In the Parliament at London, they'll say that we're all mouth and no kilts. You can visualise it if you lived through the 79 referendum, because that was a much smaller thing, much smaller goal. And people felt and realised what they had done to themselves in the time immediately following that referendum. And it took us quite a wee while to lift politics in Scotland up. And it wasn't really until the UCS came along and that sort of heart came back into Scotland. Now, we can't afford to do that. Right now, there's extra revenue available to any Scottish Treasury, and we should be using that money productively just now. And I don't care what they say about we couldn't possibly have enough money coming in to fund the things we wanted. Who's kidding who? Why are they trying to hold on to us? So,
could I ask you to conclude, please?
Oh yes, I was just noticing that, Presiding Officer. Thank you very much indeed. I'll just say what I've said. Maybe the government would take it on board as regards the breadth of the white paper.
Thank you very much. I now call Kenny McCaskill, Cabinet Secretary. You have until 4:44.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government is committed to helping create a fairer and safer Scotland for all our people. We'll continue our distinctive and highly effective approach to justice, which is focused on doing the right thing for the people of Scotland, putting their interests and their values, as others mentioned earlier, first. It is this approach that has led, for example, to our policy of ensuring that we have 1,000 extra police officers keeping our communities safe, a matter that was again confirmed today. And it is bearing fruit. The results are clear. As the First Minister mentioned earlier, recorded crime is at a 39-year low. Knife crime is down 60% since we took office in 2007. Violent crime is down 1/5 in just the last year alone, and by nearly half since again we came to office. All this in a climate where Westminster budget cuts continue to create massive financial challenges across the justice sector, as across every sector, and we're focused on continuing to make Scotland's communities safer. That's why we have announced today the end of automatic early release for dangerous prisoners. Deputy Presiding Officer, automatic early release was introduced by the then UK Conservative government in 1993. It remained unaltered throughout the period of devolved Labour and Liberal Democrat coalition. It is this SNP administration that is ending it. We are taking action to make Scotland safer, by all means.
He used the expression dangerous prisoners. Can he just give absolute clarity, though, to the Chamber on to whom would this apply? Exactly which criminals, what size of sentences and so on, so there's clarity.
Well, we are making it clear that it is those dangerous prisoners who would cause harm. That includes, obviously, those who perpetrate violence offences. That clearly is encapsulated by the period of 10 years, which would encapsulate offences, not simply, as I say, culpable homicide, serious other matters. So it's that period, which I think would be of interest, given some of the points made by Mr Brown earlier. I don't know if he knows that 10 years is, in fact, the period that was brought in 2012, south of the border, under the Legal Aid Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act. It is that matter, as I say, that Chris Grayling has affected. It is that date that he has set. But we are targeting serious, dangerous people who would cause harm in our communities and who we think it is essential that we have to ensure that there is the power to keep them in for the period necessary for their sentence, and only to allow them to be released if it is a matter that satisfies that body charged with looking after the interest of the public, namely the parole board. By all means.
What about serious, dangerous criminals who would do us harm, who are sentenced for shorter periods?
Cabinet Secretary.
As the First Minister was kindly helping me, that also relates to those, as I say, into committee sexual offence, because we realise the consequences there, and there the tariff is set at 4 years. So I do hope, given, as I say, that Mr Brown and his colleagues have been calling for the abolition of early automatic release, they will now welcome the action taken by this government. Dangerous offenders, such as I said, are violent offenders sentenced to 10 years or more, sexual offenders sentenced to 4 years or more in prison. As I say, we will address that. The parole board will be empowered to consider risks to the public for these prisoners. If a prisoner poses an unacceptable risk to the public, the prisoner will stay in prison and serve their entire sentence, and will bring forward amendments to our Criminal Justice Scotland Bill, and if approved by Parliament, and I hope unanimously, that will provide the protection that the public are seeking and are entitled to. Parliament is already considering important reforms through the Criminal Justice Bill, including corroborated evidence no longer routinely being required. It's quality, not quantity of evidence that the Lord Justice Clerk has said is necessary. We are clear that strong cases, ones that can be taken forward in other countries under their systems, should not be denied a hearing in our system because of the requirement for corroboration. This reform will help lead, by all means.
As the Cabinet Secretary is aware, I have huge concerns about the abolition of corroboration. I maintain that position, and I would ask him to consider the position of many of us in the Chamber, perhaps some also in these benches, with regard to looking at it in the context of reviewing the position about not proven, proven and guilty, rather than taking it on its own. Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we have taken on board the understandable concerns that some have, which is why we're increasing the majority, why we're taking on board views when we ask for safeguards for the recommendations given by our most senior judges. But this is also about providing a voice for those who have suffered in silence, often vulnerable men, women and children who have experienced abuse behind closed doors where there are no eyewitnesses. In addition to existing bills, 3 new justice bills will be introduced in the year ahead. This builds upon what we're already doing in Victims and Witnesses Bill, as Ms Graham will know. Our Courts Reform Bill will take forward the recommendations of Scotland's most senior judge, Lord Gill, who was appointed by my predecessors to make recommendations to help improve the public's access to justice to provide a court system fit for the 21st century. The Damages Bill and Licensing Bill will also improve matters in those particular areas, providing, as I say, necessary changes. And we'll also have a conclusion of Contracts Bill, which will be a candidate for the new parliamentary procedures. These bills will make Scotland safer and stronger. We've delivered record police numbers. We've delivered a 39-year low in recorded crime, and we're now ending what the public have seen as an injustice for far too long: automatic early release.
The debate on the Scottish Government's programme for Government 2013-14 will continue tomorrow afternoon. The next item of business today is consideration of Business Motion 7528 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a Stage 1 timetable for the Marriage and Civil Partnership Scotland Bill. Any member who wishes to speak against the motion should press the request to speak button now. And I call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 7528.
Moved.
I thank Mr Fitzpatrick. I know Annabel Ewing. Thank you. Annabel Ewing's now been cleared. She doesn't want to oppose it. No member has asked to speak against the motion. Therefore, I will now put the question to the Chamber. The question is that motion number 7528, in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 7529 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a Stage 2 timetable for the Victims and Witnesses Scotland Bill. Any member who wishes to speak against the motion to press the request to speak button now. And I call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 7529.
Moved.
And no member is asked to speak against the motion, and there's no member on the screen. Therefore, I will now put the question to the Chamber. The question is that motion number 7529, in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. The next item of business is consideration of 3 Parliamentary Bureau motions, and ask Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 7530 on committee membership, motion number 7568 on substitution on committees, and motion number 7531 on the office of the clerk.
Moved en bloc.
The questions on these motions will be put at decision time. There are 4 questions as a result of today's business. The first question is that motion number 7499, in the name of Ruth Davidson, the motion of condolence, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The next question is that motion number 7530, in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, on committee membership, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. The next question is that motion number 7568, in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, on substitution on committees, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. The next question is that motion number 7531, in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick, on the office of the clerk, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. That concludes decision time. We now move to members' business. Members who leave the chamber should now do so quickly and quietly.